Hello and welcome to the Student StarCraft AI weekly or tournament weekly broadcast. This is Nightcat, and along with me, I have here.
I'm Chobo Swaggins, aka Jealous on Team Liquid, and today we're bringing you a very special show match between Stardust and Monster. These two faced off in the finals of the most recent SSCAIT tournament, with Stardust dominating Monster with a 4-0 score. However, there was an issue where Monster's creator, Dr. Frankenstein, Lines Prower, had coded the AI for specific map file names, which were different in the tournament proper. How this manifested is that Monster did not place its buildings in the most optimal locations on some of the maps, which hurt its build quite a lot. So we thought that it would be interesting to run a show match where we use the map pack that both AI are prepared for, and we're hoping to see a closer series between two of the best RTS AI in the world.
Yeah, and I think where we really, it did show itself through pretty much every game that these two played against each other in the tournament, but I think where it really showed was in the first matchup in the winner's bracket between the two before the finals, when Stardust was able to essentially snipe the extractor of Monster in every game in that first series. And I'm willing to bet that was due to the building placement not working right.
Yeah, absolutely, and we already see here the 12 hatch was placed close to the ramp. It's almost an ideal location where you can start placing Sunkens. For those of you who did not tune into the finals or to the group stage matches, what Monster seems to be doing against Stardust, what it has chosen as the optimal response to Stardust's infamous 4 Gateway Dragoon build, is that you place Sunkens on the high ground, you tech to Lurker drop, and you actually use that Lurker drop to expand as opposed to harass. So it is an interesting approach. It's going to be even more interesting to see if it works better now that it will have consistent defenses on its high ground.
Yeah, and both authors have submitted for this show match the version of their AI that participated in the tournament. So literally the only difference between this and then what happened in the tournament is the map pack.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's actually a really important point too. Recently in the Schnail Discord, someone was looking into how they could beat Stardust's 4 Gateway Dragoon build, and they came up with a 2 base crackling. You take your natural really quickly, and then you get Hive very fast, and you get upgraded Zerglings, and you just beat the Protoss down with pure Zergling. And Lines Prower, the creator of Monster, incorporated that build into Monster that very same day. So I think that a match between the current versions of the two would be significantly different from what we are going to see here, but it is still an interesting situation here as Stardust tries to poke up against these sunken colonies here.
Yeah, and I'm really excited too to see because, essentially we only saw this build in the tournament execute properly on, I think it was like 2 of the maps that they played, one of which being Destination, which the map name is only 1 word. And I forget the other one offhand, so I'm excited to see how this plays out on these different maps with, different features to them and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was picking this map pack, I chose only maps that are in the SSCAIT map pack, and I tried to go for a really broad variety of maps. So Fighting Spirit, it's a very standard opening map. You have a high ground that should work in Monster's benefit to some extent. You can Lurker drop to a high ground main or a 3rd base as well, where Lurkers will be good at defending. Burrowed Zergling there, nice to point out that it's one of the features of Monster that really slows down enemy AI who are not able to place their Nexus or Command Center before getting detection there.
Yeah, and that's something that you could do to a human player as well, but a human player is going to probably more react in terms of getting that detection a little bit faster to clean that situation up and focus more on cleaning that situation up than an AI is going to. And now we do have the Lurkers and the drone coming across here, I think, to take this upper left expansion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, taking this main is definitely the safer choice, I believe. Oh my god, it burrowed its own hatchery, it blocked its own hatchery. Oh no. Oh, okay, it figured it out. That's nice. That was funny. Yeah, so this is definitely a safer base to take because there's only one ramp. If it had taken its gas expansion, the 3 o'clock base, there would be two ramps that could be potentially pushed into, or the 12 o'clock as well. I also noticed by the minimap, it sent Zerglings to a lot of other bases. It's patrolling between two of them. It's burrowed Zerglings in other ones to prevent any further expansion from Stardust and hamper its ability to capitalize on the map control it has.
Yeah, and I was just remembering too, I think the other map, I think the building placement was still off, but where we saw a monster get close to taking another main was Tau Cross. And the problem though is even if the building placement were right, like it doesn't have a nice ramp on Tau Cross like it does here. So, and also in Destination, which doesn't have a third or fourth main for it to take, the only real good base where it could take and make those lurkers effective is the base that has like that bridge to it.
Yeah, the pocket.
But it's all low ground to low ground still. So I'm really interested to see how this is going to play out with these lurkers here, and will we get like maybe another hatchery near here, and then another set of sunkens.
That would be a good play. I definitely agree with that. But my further question is, what happens after this? You know, does it take the third main in the same way? Does it eventually expand to its natural? That's something that we didn't get a chance to see quite a lot of in the previous series between these two AI. So it's going to be interesting to see how gameplay develops here. And I do think that FS might be one of the maps that lends itself best to this style of play.
Yeah, and I was just poking around the map there a little bit. We can see that, you know, the third is being delayed by the Zergling. It is going to eventually get laid down because the Zergling, while it does heal, it heals slowly, and so over time the probe should be able to kill it. But like Stardust is still on only 2 bases.
And I mean, but they're both on only 2 bases. Stardust does have an impressive amount of army too, so I don't think that monster will be able to move out anytime soon. I think we're seeing some drone transport here. I'm not sure if it's for spreading out the economy better or if there's going to be an attempt to take another base. Judging by the movement of those overlords to the left, maybe it is thinking about taking that third base on the bottom left. And actually I see, I don't know how that drone got there, but it looks like that it is going to be 3 mains against a main and a natural here very soon.
Yeah, I've noticed that there's more Zerglings out on the map by the mini-map here, and so I think they were produced and came out of the other expansion. It looks like, so this was more, oh, okay, it also did transport some drones now. And also, let's just comment too that this is something that we don't really see from other AI, is this type of advanced transport usage, where, you know, they know that there is this huge army here that I can't go through, so I'm just going to skirt around the edge of the map here with these transports.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's something that only really came out in the past year or so, as far as I recall. I remember when people were really shocked when people started taking the island bases on Andromeda, for example. And that's something that both Monster and Stardust are capable of doing, actually.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why you don't see that sort of thing happen a lot in the AI scene is that it's a lot more cost-effective to spend your time on things that are more focused towards the early game and towards the mid game, and that's sort of true for humans as well. You know, you tend to practice those more often because if those fundamentals aren't good, then you can't make your end game better because your end game state is going to be chaos.
That's definitely true, and I think part of the reason why, like, the contributing factor to that is that you generally just lose before then, right? So you're kind of forced to naturally improve. The problem with AI, as far as I understand, is that, you know, if you have a very simple AI, you're not going to really learn the way that a human learns. You know, you're just going to lose every single game, so you have to constantly improve that early game by coding for it. I noticed that Monster has now taken the 3 o'clock base and has made Mutalisks. These Mutalisks have made some insane comebacks in the other series that it had in the tournament. The Mutalisks are very effective at sniping workers. Stardust is down to 27 at this time against the 60 of Monster, and Monster is up in bases now.
Yeah, and I was trying to hunt down the Mutalisks for a moment there because I had lost track of them. I managed to find them there attacking the gateways. So yeah, it seems like Stardust's army is just kind of really struggling with where should I be. And, you know, there's kind of like a stray Mutalisk here in the map that's kind of leading a good chunk of the army away while the main Mutalisk force was taking out the workers there. Now, we've got 11 Mutas, which is still a lot. This third base has fallen. Didn't quite get that established, but even with that, this third base still not up, even though the Zergling has been killed. Or rather was chasing, I guess, that probe.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that took a long time actually. I was surprised to see that. The follow-up probes were sent out quite late, and now the Hydras are trying to move out from the main base. They're not in really all that high of a number. Stardust still does have the army advantage, but it's not as great as it was about 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, I think what happened here, and now it is taking this 12 o'clock base, or actually, I guess that's the 11 o'clock. But I think because the army had been lured away for so long, and then this 3 o'clock base was being attacked, because I think we saw that in another game in the finals, Monster felt comfortable enough to move its main army out. Even if it wasn't necessarily larger, it felt comfortable, like, okay, I can actually walk out of my base and maybe try to defend something.
Yeah, and in the meantime, though, the worker count continues to plummet. It's only down to 20 probes at this time. I mean, 20 probes is just about enough to efficiently mine the natural, but the natural is running out of money, and it's basically going to be on a one-base economy as this natural mines out quite soon.
Yeah, and Monster keeps harassing this natural. I feel like the better play at this point would be to try and harass this 6 o'clock base and take it out. Because, or I guess it's the 5:30-ish. Because it's not quite in the middle, but like if Monster can keep this base from coming up online, Monster has this game.
Yeah, absolutely, and part of this is because Stardust, the author of Stardust freely admitted the fact that, at this point, Stardust is really only good at one thing, and that's tier 1 or 1.5 units, which is Zealots and Dragoons. And they are thinking about adding more, advanced technology like Corsairs, for example, but that comes with a price too. It's been a talking point in our Discord recently where, because of how effective Nutilisks and Zerg units in general now are splitting for the top AI, any splash damage units are not really all that effective, and we see the Mutalisk actually took down that cannon and are applying pressure to that last mining base. There's only 11 workers now for Stardust.
Yeah, and I think this game is going to eventually end up as a Monster win because, like I was saying, Monster needed to stop this base from being established, and then sure enough, there were Mutalisks there.
Yeah, and now Monster, using its superior economy, it's finally whittled down the army to where it has an army advantage. It's going to move out with Zerglings and Hydralisks, which are going to fare very well against a lower number of Dragoons. And yeah, I think the writing is on the wall here. I think Monster is going to take its first win against Stardust in 3 series now.
Yeah, very exciting to see. So I think some of the map factors here really worked out in Monster's favor. There's also a large distance between the mains, so really it's not easy for Stardust to really handle its army positioning to be able to threaten multiple locations at the same time, and I think that really worked out for this sort of turtle Zerg that Monster was going for.
Yeah, absolutely. Fighting Spirit being a 4-player map, each corner being a main base, it's some of the longest distances that you can have in the game. I mean, obviously there's Benzene still, which is diagonally very far away as well. That's something that we will be seeing later in the series. But yeah, it looks like Fighting Spirit goes to Monster here. And but like I mentioned earlier, going further in this series, we are going to have a wide variety of maps. We're going to have 2-player maps, 3-player maps, reverse ramp maps, no ramp maps. So it's going to be interesting to see how these two play out across all the different terrain available to them.
So let's go ahead and hop into game 2.
Alright, and the next game is going to be on Destination. We have Stardust spawning at the 12 o'clock base as the Orange Protoss.
And Monster as the teal Zerg down at the bottom. So this is reminiscent of the game on Destination they played in the finals then, where Monster was on the bottom and Stardust was up at the top position.
Yeah, and that was one of the tightest games that we saw between the two AIs, and again, that's probably due to the fact that the map file name is only one word, and the fact that there is this really nice ramp. Perhaps even helping the fact that it's a reverse ramp, engineered back before all of our modern optimizations for ramp placements. So perhaps this ramp that is facing in the opposite direction of the standard is actually even better for Monster here.
Yeah, it's thankfully not. I don't think that has like a what were they called, a unit vortex there?
Yeah.
I don't think it has one of those, but it's
yeah,
still.
No vortex. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's still not the easiest to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some situations where there are like some vision blind spots. There are lesser pathing issues that can happen going up and down. Someone like Freakling would be able to probably write a book on all those things. The drone scouted, walked past the Zealot, walked right past it again. The Zealot, unfazed, is just preparing itself to block the ramp when it comes to 3 Zealots, I expect. That's what generally we see from Monster, especially after it confirms the fact that it's not going to be early Zergling pressure, because sometimes we do see Stardust go up to 6 Zealots, but in this case, I think we're going to go straight into Dragoons after this.
Yeah, and I kind of like this too from Stardust, that it really doesn't care about this scout. It's not really doing anything that it needs to hide from its opponent. And AIs tend to be less reactive to what they are actually scouting compared to human players. So I kind of like that it's not wasting a whole bunch of time, or there's not a whole bunch of logic in trying to chase down that drone until the Dragoons pop out.
Yeah, and on top of that, I'm sure that the bot authors know that other bot authors have coded their drone micro really well, their worker micro in general. That Zergling deftly running around the army in the middle of the map to go and, well, there's already one burrowed there, but it looks like it's sending a second one to, I guess, maybe... I'm actually confused about what the Zergling's doing. I expected it to go block a different base, but the Zergling... Oh, look, it's running back again. Maybe it's double-checking? It's the scouting, maybe?
Yeah, it's interesting. It wanted to it looked like it wanted to scout the main again for some reason. And it got there as the drone died, so the drone was still in the main. I'm not exactly sure why it wanted to poke back in there.
And we see the situation playing out again where the burrowed Zergling and the natural of Stardust forced the probe to try to place the Nexus about a dozen times, and then the probe decided, now I'm going to go back and now I'm going to make a cannon here. Forcing an earlier forge from... Stardust here, and Stardust adding the 5th gateway. I did speak to the bot creator. It's actually a 6th gateway now. This is sort of like an error. It's because Stardust has all this extra money, so it starts throwing down these gateways in anticipation of a Nexus that it doesn't yet have.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it's essentially going, okay, well, my Nexus should be down. So, and I still have all this money. I guess, yeah, gateways is what to get.
This Zergling actually is not denying the natural this time, so this could play out in Stardust's favor a little bit more. Maybe it figured that because of army coming out through the natural ramp, it wouldn't be effective to unburrow. Maybe it tries to maximize the amount of time that it stays burrowed and prevent that natural a little bit longer. That's my guess.
That could be a possibility, because the army units coming out, it can't necessarily predict when the next one is going to be coming down the ramp. And so any extra hit it takes shortens the lifespan of that Zergling, essentially. And I just noticed that a lurker here has burrowed. Okay, it moved. I was thinking it burrowed right where there was a sunken.
Yeah, the initial placement of those 2 lurkers was a little bit suspect as well. I mean, it was on top of those 2 sunkens and a little bit far away from the ramp. They wouldn't have been effective anyway. Definitely might be better suited for taking this low ground pocket third, as we discussed earlier. And interesting choice to send the Zerglings all the way back to the main after dropping them there. I would have expected them to go to more expansions the way that it did on FS. Right now, only burrowed at 2 locations on Stardust's side of the map.
Yeah, I suspect that could be because there's less safe space to patrol. Because as the army is... The expectation of, I would imagine, is that Stardust's army is going to gather right outside of my base, which essentially means they're going to be cutting straight down the middle. Now, it does have some Zerglings patrolling this left side, but I wonder if it's because it dropped them off on the right side that it didn't feel like they could get to the left side safely, so it just said, come home, even though coming home means running into the army.
Yeah, and we're seeing a similar situation as we saw in most of the other games, bugged or not, where Monster very content to go for this one build, Stardust very content to go for this one build. Both AI believe that this is the best play for them against this opponent. And I guess Stardust doesn't change their game plan very often too much. We have seen Monsters show a greater variety of builds throughout this tournament, though. The tournament that we finished casting, yeah.
And one thing to note that is playing out different in this game than in the game with the tournament is that so Monster has expanded at the little base across the bridge down next to it, as opposed to the one next to Stardust. So in the tournament, it actually expanded at the one that was right next to Stardust.
I think it's going there now, actually. Just as you say that, it sent the drone across the middle of the map to try to take that base, too. It's like, that is the best base for me, even though it is far away and right in your face. I like that base, and I think that alerted Stardust to the fact that there's a base here. Now, this is where holding is tricky. I think that it would have benefited from having as many sunks at the third base as it does in its, at the second base, as it does in its main base. The Hydros are coming around now, though, to try to stem the flow of Dragoons here.
They're
They
not
go into
attacking.
speed render though. Yeah, they're not attacking. They just ran right in.
I think they were probably trying to get close to where the Sunkens were to try and essentially attack from that side. And so they were just doing essentially move orders. There were a few attacks in there, but yeah, they just kind of absorbed all the hits from the Dragoons and just died, which is unfortunate to see. And we do have now that hatchery going at the pace where a cannon is just finished. But the pylon goes down.
No observer here to stop the Dragoons, but the Dragoons don't care. They're trying to focus down this hatchery. That's a good call. The observer finally makes its way here. It did pull the entire army back here, though, and this might give it a little bit of breathing room to hold this natural. There's no lurkers here, though, and no time to play sunks yet. Hydra's on a bridge, though, could be very effective at holding this Dragoon army, though. Ooh, they decide to pull back instead.
Yeah, I feel like that fight at the second base, first of all, if the Hydralisk had engaged, that would have been better for Monster. But I still don't think that force was enough to fully clear it up. And he's going to go ahead and give the GG here. But I think it just needed a lot more lurkers there to try and hold that bridge longer.
And more Sunkens, too. Only 4 Sunks, and the Sunks are honestly not in the greatest concave. They weren't hitting the bridge all at the same time. Yeah, so surprisingly enough, this time around, Destination is not working out too well for Monster this time. So 1-1 going into this series.
And so jumping into game 3 here, we have Monster spawning as the green Zerg on Tau Cross over here at the, I guess that would be like the 9 o'clock position.
Yep, and we got Stardust in the bottom right as the blue Protoss. So this map, it, as you may well know, does not have a ramp. It actually has a quite open natural space, and the main to the natural is somewhat narrow. You could place 1 pylon there, 1 depot. It doesn't full block on most locations, I think, but either way, we're not going to expect to see that. We are going to see the Sunkens, I think, and the Lurkers. It's going to be interesting to see how well Monster can hold the pressure from Stardust on a flat map like this.
Yeah, this is, I think, the first match we're going to see without the bug that hit it during the tournament on a flat map like this. And we do see now... So like on the first matchup, this is one of those maps where we were like, oh, it's a good thing Monster didn't spawn where it did because this extractor is very exposed. And the way that it was placing its buildings during the tournament, this extractor would have remained exposed. But now we see the hatchery is coming down closer to the choke point. The Sunkens are going to be able to be placed at that choke point and actually protect and stop that extractor from getting sniped by Stardust.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually think I think you could have placed the hatchery a little bit closer to that entrance. It's going to take some time for the creep to spread to that location. If it tries to throw down a Sunken very early, it's not going to be placed quite well enough to block the entire entrance. So I think that the hatchery could have actually been placed even better than this.
Yeah, and I feel like Monster could have done a slight variation in what it's doing on this map very easily. The natural, it could have plopped the hatchery up there and done its sunken line. Like, so not necessarily where you would want to place it to gather from, but it could have placed it closer to the natural choke. And then from there, when it wants to expand, it doesn't have to drop off at another base. It could just take its natural.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would have been prudent on this map, especially considering the fact that there's very few safe bases on this map. There is the second main, which generally makes this a little bit better for Zerg than Protoss in human play, because on a map with 3 mains, the Zerg takes 2 mains. Protoss doesn't have one left for itself. But but the rest of the map is very wide open.
Yeah, and just a note real quick: the Zergling that was going to burrow in the natural, a Stardust got picked off, and then another Zergling that was trying to get on the way ran into the army, managed to dodge the first 3 Zealots in the Dragoon, but got caught by the reinforcement Dragoons and was not able to get there and burrow. So this is going to be a normally timed natural for Stardust.
Yeah, and that should be a huge advantage. It's going to be able to produce its army much quicker. It's going to be able to make use of those additional gateways that it throws down, already up to 5. So yeah, I expect to see a lot more army count from Stardust, and given the fact that this is a rampless map, I think that a bust is quite possible here. We see Stardust trying to sniff around and see if maybe it's already time to do so.
Yeah, I think this is the first game we've seen between these two AI, these specific versions of them, where Monster was unable to block that natural. And I just noticed that the probes were dancing around the Nexus before it finished with minerals.
Yeah, and I do like the fact that Monster kind of hides the Hydralisks behind the sunken colonies, so that kind of, in case Stardust does overcommit, reading that there's only 4 sunkens there, Hydras can pop forward and apply some damage, scare the Protoss army back, maybe whittle down some numbers. But on the other hand, you have to consider the fact that on one base economy, making so many Hydralisks while going for drop tech, while going for Overlord speed, while going for Lurker and Lurkers in general, that's a huge mineral and gas investment. So it's just slowing down its own expansion attempts here as Stardust confidently takes its 3rd base.
Yeah, I think really this build is relying on those early Zerglings to get in position to block Stardust from taking its expansions. Now, I do notice that it is getting additional hatcheries right now. So we're going to be up to 4 hatcheries before we even expand. Now the expansion is, the travel to the expansion is happening.
Yeah, and the Zerglings got dropped off as well, but it looks like they're going to be running back towards its natural base from that position. It's an interesting choice. Maybe the first ones always do that, or maybe they try to run from behind to check just how much army is there. 2 of the Zerglings do go down. 1 is going to burrow on this base to the right here at 3 o'clock.
Yeah, what's a bit unfortunate about that is the one that did finally get to burrow too is that it's not really going to block much. Stardust only needs 3 bases to really break a 1 base Zerg, and while we are getting the 2nd base up, if it doesn't get a nice sunken line at that base like it has here, Stardust could probably take that 2 base Zerg with 3 bases pretty easily.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the sunken line is fat. There are 5, 6 of them there actually, but with this amount of Dragoons, is getting to that point where a bust could be coming in. The Dragoons could try to get a good arc by hugging the north wall. I think that is definitely an approach that could work out. That would prevent the sunkens all the way at the bottom right from doing much damage. But Stardust, in no real hurry, really. There's not a lot of pressure for you to be busting down this, regardless of your AI or human, because of the fact that that you yourself already have so much map control.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at this top right natural right now, or not natural, but the top right main, and noticing that it's building its sunkens right by the hatchery while the lurkers are at the choke. So not a lot of coordination going on there from the defense. I mean, I understand the rush to get those sunkens as fast as possible, but you're leaving these lurkers entirely exposed.
Yeah, and again, the Observer, just like last game, it spotted the Lurkers there. The Dragoons were sent there to possibly try to apply some pressure, but then the Observer left, and now the Dragoons got distracted by a Zergling, and now that base is just being allowed to stay up, and I'm not sure if that's the best way to use your army, is just to camp in this natural. I think that, but I also do want to add that I totally agree with you. I was just thinking earlier how great it would be if Monster brought 2 drones instead of just 1 with this, and placed a hatchery at the choke as well, instead of one of those 4 hatcheries that it has in its main base.
Yeah, and I suspect that it's probably using the same set of rules or logic for building placement when it expands, whether it's at a main base or it's at something like, say, a natural or just one of the other expansions on the map. It would have been really cool to see if Monster had something in it that just said, hey, you know what? I'm expanding to another main base, so yeah, let me take 2 drones, let me plop down 2 hatcheries, one that's going to be used for gathering, and one that would have been placed as if I had started there, and then essentially make the same sunken line and kind of get 2 different army productions going on. And then, which essentially Stardust tries to commit to attacking one of the mains, then the army at the other main just comes in and they can kind of sandwich Stardust's army.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we haven't really brought up in these series so far is the fact that because of this really heavy investment and the really low, base count that has gases at it, Monster is at 0/0 upgrades. Now, for Hydralisks, that isn't as big of a deal as it is for Zerglings, for example, against Protoss, but it is still a significant deal. And actually, we see a nice move coming from the other base. They caught out a couple of Dragoons here, and maybe it's going to be able to take this natural here.
Yeah, so it looks like so it is Monster is expanding at its natural. It's also got some drones out as as the Dragoons were running back. I'm not sure exactly what pulled all of the army back. There is one Mutalisk out on the map that just died. So maybe.
Oh my god. This cleanup right here, the Dragoons were coming back in a conga line, and they lost so many numbers here. I mean, the army counts are still going to remain similar, but that was a big win for Monster, I think.
Yeah, and Monster's probably going to lose this natural now. I think I noticed that a lot of Zerglings were also dying in that fight, and as soon as the Hydralisks lost the Zergling support, the Hydralisks decided to pull back. So I think Monster has something in it where it's using those Zerglings to soak up shots, and once they're gone, it goes, okay, my Hydralisks are too valuable, I need to pull them back. Which makes sense for this low gas gathering build.
True, but I also kind of feel that maybe it fell back a little bit too far. I think that if it stayed in its natural there, made a concave, it could have abused that conga line of Dragoons even further. But yeah, an advantage that didn't materialize. And yeah, the Mutalisk count really not that great. And again, as you said, off of 2 gases, there's only so many Mutalisks you can make. The main is now mined out for Monster. It's only on 1 mineral line. And it doesn't seem to be, it doesn't seem like it's going to be able to take that 3rd base for itself in the natural of the other main, because there's a cannon hit already going up there for Stardust there.
Yeah, and I got kind of excited when I saw the Mutalisks pop out, because in game 1, that was really where things started to turn for Monster. Once it got those Mutalisks out and was able to really cut into Stardust's worker count, I feel like Monster was on the verge of being able to do that this game, but perhaps Stardust just wasn't slowed down enough when it was able to just take its natural at normal time.
Absolutely, and we are now up to 7 mutas at least. There's 7 in this clump here, so that is enough to snipe probes even with armor upgrade. But maybe it's too little too late, as you said. But as I say that, the Hydras are coming out again, the Mutalisks are supporting as well. The conga line of Dragoons is coming to back it up though, and unfortunately not enough. The Lurkers on burrow and retreat, and yeah, I think that all of these situations where Monster is retreating, it's looking at itself very short term, It's not thinking about the future, because if it...
Oh, this Lurker though.
Oh my god, yeah, that's a critical area for that Lurker to be in. And no Observer support still, I'm quite puzzled by that. Oh, the Observer is stuck in the main base of Monster because there's Overlords and Hydralisks there. It's too scared to approach. There's 2 of them there now, actually, stuck like that.
Oh, it's because of the angle that they're coming at. Yeah, they're not coming at a good angle to get up to where the army is. And it was such a shame to see that Lurker unburrow, because it could have killed so many more Dragoons.
And there's now actually 3 observers kind of in that area. The 3rd one is trying to navigate away, but I think it might be too little too late. The new main base for Monster, is down to like the 200, 300, 400 minerals per patch, while Stardust is now on more bases than these mutas can harass at any given time, I think.
Yeah, Stardust is slowly taking over the map here, but it just keeps throwing Dragoons into this meat grinder here. And yeah, it's interesting to see, like, this is something we kind of talk about with Mutalisk harass, where the path, they tend to just take the most direct path instead of finding, the gaps and the openings that may not be so obvious. We're kind of seeing that with the Observer, where the Observer was trying to take the most direct path and not being like, okay, well, there's things there, I can't get there. So instead of going around, it just would back up and then go forward a little bit and be like, oh, wait, they're still there.
It's like peekaboo, like maybe they're gone, like maybe if I leave for like half a second and I come back, they won't be there anymore. But yeah, now drones dying in the natural, as Monster is desperate to take another base now, but I don't think it's going to happen in this game.
Yeah, I mean, I think even with just the 1 mineral line left, Monster still maybe has a little bit of time. It is losing more Sunkens, though, and doesn't have the drones at this base to replace them quickly like it normally does. But it's long term, I don't think it's going to be able to outlast Stardust, just due to the fact that it is going to run out of minerals first.
Yeah, and we do see 1 upgrade did come in for Zerg. This is just to make a comment, and it is the armor upgrade, which I think the logic behind that is that it benefits the drones, the Zerglings, and the Hydralisks. But in general, when you're going for a mass Hydra play, you almost always want to go for that range upgrade, and it benefits both the Lurkers with their splash damage and the Hydra so much more than any armor upgrade would, especially when the Protoss is ahead in upgrades with 3-3 already up for Stardust.
Yeah, and one thing that is unfortunate about when you watch games in Remaster versus OpenBW is that those sort of upgrades that just have side effects, you can't really check if those were researched at any given point. You kind of have to catch the building doing the research.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Stardust has mined out quite a number of bases, but Monster has mined out entirely as well, and it is placing 1 last Desperation Hatchery that's going to get taken down at 12 o'clock base. And I think that might be the finishing blow for Monster here, as this hatchery goes down soon.
Yeah, it very well played game by both of these AI, and I feel like Monster, and what's really unfortunate too is that Monster didn't cancel that, so now it only has the 100 minerals and can't get another hatchery.
Yeah.
But I feel like this game could have easily gone in Monster's favor if it had been able to successfully block that natural for some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Making a concave with Hydralisk. We see, I believe I'm not sure, I think it's Purple Wave, that makes the really nice conga line, not conga line, a line of Zealots in its natural, to defend it. You know, it makes a perfect, line to defend any aggression that comes into its natural when it's trying to take it. I think that if you made kind of an arc with the Hydralisk, or the same way that it makes with the Sunkens in its main base, I think that it might have been able to hold that, especially if it puts a couple lurkers behind there. But yeah, holding that natural would have been crucial for Monster there.
And so with that, Monster is going to go ahead and give the good game, which is going to put Stardust up 2-1. And we can go ahead and hop into game 4.
All right, let's go. All right, and for game 4, we have Monster spawning on the bottom right of Jade as the white Zerg.
And Stardust as the yellow Protoss up at the top left.
Now, I want you to take a look at where Monster's Overlord is flying right now. As you can see here, it is a reverse ramp map. So this is something that I believe we haven't seen Monster play Stardust on yet. And my suspicion is that this is not going to play out that well for Monster at all, considering the fact that it's relying so much on the ability to choke here. But actually, look, it's going to take its natural here. Or wait, no, this is a scouting drone. I'm sorry. I thought it was going to take its natural, which I think would be the advisable play. Maybe even if it places the hatchery, as you suggested in the last game, off center, you know, to wall up that flat choke that it has in the natural.
Yeah, because one of the things I'm worried about is if it tries to hold this reverse ramp here, which it looks like that's what it's going to do. That's really far away, too, from the ramp. Actually, no, I don't think Dragoons can hit that from the upper ground, but what I'm worried about is the Dragoons on the upper ground, or higher ground, being able to hit the Sunkens.
And the Sunkens will have a greater miss chance shooting up. On top of that, I think it's something like a 53% chance to hit when shooting uphill, so that's going to make them even less effective at establishing that meat grinder that it has. And yeah, I agree with you. That hatchery placement is incredibly far away. I think it might have been better off actually to just place a Sunken at the edge of its starting creep and work from there if it wanted to.
Yeah, I'm going to be paying attention to... I'm very interested to see where it's going to place these Sunkens. Stardust behind this is just doing its usual thing. It's getting the 3 Zealots and then going ahead and getting the Cybernetics core, so we'll see the Dragoons start to pop out soon as well. Burrow is underway, so we'll also try to keep an eye out on if it's able to get that Zergling placed in the natural of Stardust.
Yeah, that first Zergling is coming out very early this time, and I think it should be able to establish that position. It's before any Dragoons are out at all, so I think it may be able to do so. The Zerglings, maybe Burrow's not done yet, actually. Okay, now it Burrow's in that natural location, and the Dragoons have come out. There is an Overlord here. The Dragoon could try to snipe it. I'm kind of surprised to see that Overlord be there at this time.
Yeah, it is very exposed out in the open, but the Dragoons are much more interested in getting to Monster's base, and now the Sunkens are back pretty far from that reverse ramp, so it seems... I wonder if Monster is playing this as if this is more of just a low ground to low ground type of map like we had like in the last game, where it's just looking at this as a choke point and not really considering this as any type of advantage or disadvantage of the ramp, or maybe because it sees that it is high ground to low ground, that's why it's further back.
Yeah, and on top of that, I think Stardust is, you know, it sees 3 Sunkens, it sees some Hydralisks, and it thinks like, okay, that's too much for me to handle, I'm not going to fight it. You know, it's doing some simple arithmetic in its head. It's kind of like, okay, this is too much for me. Instead of considering the option of maybe running around, before all these Hydras popped out, I think that could have been a possibility. But in this situation now, with the 4 Sunken coming up and more Hydras, it is going to be difficult to do so. I don't think it's going to be as brave as it was in that first foray into the main base of Monster there.
Yeah, and long term though, it's probably the safer play to not try and just bust and end it there, because realistically, you know, Stardust is going to get its natural up. If it does not throw, like you were saying in one of the games that we were casting, I think it was a Protoss vs. Terran though, where, you know, losing the backbone of your army as Protoss is losing your Dragoons. So why risk losing your Dragoons in that situation when you can just sit back and be in a more comfortable position? Now, unfortunately, this macro hatch that keeps trying to place is easily hit from the high ground by these Dragoons, forced to cancel it and replace it a couple of times.
And Jade is also another one other thing to point out is Jade is another one of those maps, kind of like Towercross, where there is no real good, safe, non-main base for a monster to take. It's not like Destination where it has that pocket expansion with the long bridge. The main base, even the other main base, if it expands the same way that we've seen so far, monster will just place 2 lurkers and the Sunkens all the way back. But yeah, it's actually losing quite a lot of money by trying to place this hatchery over and over again, despite it being sniped. Every time you do that, you lose quite a number of minerals there.
Yeah, I think you lose what, like 20% of the cost or 15%, something like that.
It's more. I'm pretty sure it's 33 or 20. I think it's 25. It's 25 or 33. It's definitely one of those two.
Yeah, and that's it's 300 minerals to plop it down. So yeah, every time it's losing probably like close to 50 minerals or so.
Yeah, 75 to 100 or so at least. Yeah.
Something like that, yeah. It looks like it's given up on it for right now, but that could just be because it doesn't have the minerals to place it.
Yeah, it lost a lot of money doing that, and it is making those hydros again. It's taken the main to the left, and it does have those lurkers on the bottom of the ramp. Yeah, I think that maybe in a tournament, and I'm going to talk about SSCAIT now, where there is such a variety of maps available, I think that having such a one-size-fits-all build that is so reliant on terrain features as this lurker build, maybe a little bit too much of a roll of the dice for Monster. If because the maps are chosen at random in SSCIT, it could have, for example, been Jade 5 games in a row, for example, in the finals, right? So yeah. I think that maybe the approach could be reworked a little bit. And honestly, I'm still surprised that it has completely ditched its approach that it used against other Protoss players, which is the mass Hydra play off of, standard 3-hatch opening.
Yeah, and to be fair, though, like, this seems to be pretty effective. And one of the things I think you commented on earlier is how, Stardust is known for its 1.5 tier tech.
Yeah.
It's very, very effective with Zealots and Dragoons, but it never gets anything like Reavers or units that would be effective at breaking this kind of turtling. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of why Monster went, you know what, well then let me turtle. Because you're not going to be able to crack that easily.
Yeah, and I was going to comment on the fact that Monster's second base placed the Sunkens in such a way that it can't mine gas effectively, but actually the Observer Dragoon combo finally coalesced into busting those lurkers at an appropriate time, as opposed to the first few games we saw here. And I think even though this is not enough to take down this base, as reinforcements flow in, it's going to be enough to take it down. There are some panic Sunkens being thrown down, some Hydras being made, but with this army continuing to grow for Protoss here, I don't think it's going to be able to hold. Monster's going to be able to hold here.
Yeah, I really wonder if, so Stardust was struggling to break into the main here. But then it finds this other main being taken and is able to come in and clean it up. I really do wonder if Monster was doing what we talked about before, where instead of bringing just one drone, it brings 2, and plops down 2 hatcheries simultaneously, and sets up the exact same thing at this other main. If it would have been...
yes. So like split it up, and if you find one base, I'll still have one left over. That could be an idea for sure.
Or no, I'm just thinking like if it's set up like a mirror setup. So essentially, I've got a sunken line at my main, so why not put a sunken line at the other main that I'm taking? If Stardust would be able to contain Monster on base count, if it were doing that type of play.
And I mean, at this point, Monster is completely mined out with its its second base having been taken out. And I think, like, our prediction in this case was correct. I predicted that Destination would go better, but I had a suspicion that Jade would not favor Monster with its approach here to this gameplay.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest weaknesses to it, or to this, is how it's not, when it's getting that other main, it's not treating it like a main. It's just treating it like a base. Because Stardust, even while Monster's out of minerals, it has not cracked this main yet.
Yeah.
One of the things that we thought would have happened here on Jade is that Stardust would have had an easier time doing so because of the reverse ramp, and that doesn't necessarily seem to be true. I think it's just been able to keep Monster from expanding easier.
Yes. So yeah, I definitely agree with you that the logic in expanding, if improved, could have made this a much tighter game. It should be noted as well that adding Sunkens at the bottom of the ramp does take some time. If it gets caught early, now you're losing 2 hatcheries worth of minerals when you're only on one base. So maybe it's kind of a this is already an all-in build to begin with in a sense, but maybe it just feels that it can't afford to go that all-in, to go for 2 hatcheries at the expansion, 600 minerals off of 1 mineral line. I think that might be the situation, but I am going to speed it up now. I mean, Monster does not have any money left. It's only a matter of time until Stardust takes some more bases, I think. The the Zergling at the natural third of Stardust is weakened already. Another probe is going to come here. Maybe this will be the one that takes it out. Nope, 1 HP now, and now another probe is going to come in. I think this one will be the one that will allow Stardust to place that main base. And actually, not a moment too soon. I think there's only about 400 minerals left in its natural mineral line at this time.
Yeah, and something else to note too is that, so it was trying to take that third base there for itself, but at some point it also tried to take like 12 o'clock, because there's a pylon sitting up there. So we saw that in other games too, where sometimes if it tries to take a base enough times and it fails to do so because of that burrowed Zergling, it will try another base. But in this case, there happened to be another one there. So if Monster had... This was a game where Monster was very effective at delaying Stardust's expansions, but not effective at getting expansions of its own.
Yes, and now that I'm remembering it, I remember we were talking before this game about whether or not Jade is something that we saw between these two. We saw Monster play on Jade, and I think it was against Banana Brain, where this denying of expansions, this is where I really remember it happening. And in that game, going for that 3-hatch Hydra build, combined with this expansion delaying strategy, really worked in its favor. I believe it won that game. But in this case, I don't think it's going to work out. I'm going to speed it up one more time just to see how this all ends. See how this line of Sunkens and Hydras is going to get busted. Should happen in the next minute or two, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it looks like the Zergling is now cleared out from that 4th base that Stardust wants to get, so it's going to go ahead and get that established. So eventually the Dragoon Ball here is going to feel comfortable enough to march down and face these Sunkens we suspect.
It also could be that Monster just GG's when it loses its last Zergling patrolling or something. I don't know, because the Dragoons, I mean, they're coming in a couple at a time. They lose a lot, and they're like, all right, no, we need to remake those, bring them back from ire.
It is funny just seeing all the Dragoons on fast speed kind of dance there, and there we go. Now it was finally able to bust down the sunken line, and I think it GG'd out right around when that last one popped.
Yeah, absolutely. Knowing that it doesn't have a chance anymore, it moves on to the next game. So Stardust up 3-1 now against Monster.
And hopping into game 5 here, we have Stardust spawning at the top left as the yellow Protoss on circuit breakers.
And in the bottom right, we have the purple Zerg Monster. So this map, a very standard map like Fighting Spirit. That's why I kind of put it as the 5th map, so that in case it is a blowout 5-0, both AI have a chance to play twice on a standard map. In this case, we again are returning to the 4-base situation with the high ground and a ramp. So this could play in Monster's favor. However, there are a lot fewer safe 3rd bases on this map, with the gas expansion at the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock being down ramp, and with the mineral onlys being broad and wide open. So it is going to be interesting to see if Monster is able to hold on to more bases in this game the same way it did in Fighting Spirit.
Yeah, I think one thing that's going to work for it, if it can delay Stardust's expansions, is that Stardust is probably not going to target one of the mains for an expansion for quite a while. So, Monster is slow to expand when it does this build, but if it can also make its opponent be slow to expand, then those mains will still be open when Monster wants to take them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is 2 things I wanted to bring up while we're in this build-up phase. We're kind of familiar with what both AI are going to do here. First thing I wanted to bring up is, you may have noticed, we're switching between OpenBW and StarCraft Remastered here for the broadcast. That's because towards the end game, when Stardust is controlling each Dragoon individually, we've seen it climb, up to many thousands of APM, and I think that is what causes desyncs in StarCraft Remastered. So we have to switch between the 2 ways of watching replays. If you guys are interested in OpenBW, we'll put a link in the description. And the second thing I actually forgot as I was talking about the first
Well,
thing. So
I can add on the desyncs a little bit too. One of the things that I have noticed definitely causes. Well, I guess I shouldn't say definitely, but one of the scenarios where I've seen a lot of desyncs happen as well is in when it's trying to resolve units stacking on each other. And I think when you get a lot of Dragoons together, which are kind of a bulky unit, bumping into each other a lot, you can end up with a little bit of stacking, and that can cause resolution of that to work out differently between the 1.16 engine and the remaster engine.
absolutely.
And here we do have that natural denial happening.
Yeah, the Zergling made it through. The Overlord made it there safely again as well, with the Dragoons deciding not to pick it off. I think that picking off that Overlord, even though Monster right now is not supply capped at all, it would still be a huge blow to a one base economy. You know, like there's not that many larvae, there's not that many drones. Mineral consumption is, you know, it's crucial for Monster to get all of that tech up at a time. In time for it to take a natural, I'm sorry, not a natural, an expansion, sorry. Yeah, so I think it's kind of weird that that Overlord is just completely ignored.
Yeah, I think because it might be because Stardust is doing like a 4-gate goon, so the idea behind the 4-gate goon is, you know, be aggressive, attack your opponent, and so it's just focusing on that as opposed to focusing on, you know, oh hey, there's an Overlord that I can snipe here.
Yeah.
Why don't I delay my attack and take out this Overlord?
That's true. Of course, with 4-gate Dragoon time is of the essence, but in this case, Monster, of course, is in no rush to expand at all. It's going to, again, recreate that meat grinder that we have here at the natural ramp for Monster. I remember the second thing I was going to say is that regardless of how these next few games play out, we are currently at a 3-1 score for Stardust against Monster. We are aiming to cast all 9 games to see how these two strategies kind of butt heads on different terrains, different maps. So there is going to be more games ahead of this, regardless of how the next 2 games play out.
Yep, and here we have the Overlords. They are now loaded up. They're going to go ahead, and it looks like it's going to target that bottom left main there. And one thing I was just wondering, maybe, you know, is the ramp on this map wider than the ramp on Fighting Spirit? It looks like it is.
I'm pretty sure that space ramps are slightly wider. Most of them can still be blocked with the same amount of units, but you know, stuff like placing a zealot perfectly in the middle to block a scout is a little bit more difficult. One of the famous examples of this going the wrong way was there was a show match between Bisu and Jaedong after they both won a GSL for Brood War. It was called GOM TV Star League. They had like a kind of show match, champions show match, and in the 5th game on Andromeda, because of the wide ramps, Bisu had like, I think it was 2 zealots and 1 probe. The Zerglings were able to get a good surface area on that 1 probe in between the 2 zealots and run right in. So yeah, the ramps are slightly different between the different map styles here, and I do believe that the space ramps, even the reverse ones made by hand, are broader than they are on maps like Fighting Spirit or Destination.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was maybe going to play in at all, because it might be easier to get more Dragoons up to the top to attack, but it looks like this is still playing out pretty much the same, where the army is just not comfortable marching up this ramp.
Yeah, the difference isn't going to play out that heavily for Dragoons specifically, because I still think you can only fit like 1 going up and down at any given point in time. There's really rarely going to be a time when 2 Dragoons can comfortably walk up a ramp. As anyone who's played Brood War knows, sometimes it's impossible to get 1 Dragoon down 1 ramp. So I think it is interesting that you would notice that, but I don't think it's going to play out. And we again see the denial of the expansion there at the 12 o'clock, with Stardust trying to take its 3rd cast there.
Yeah, and one thing that I wonder, maybe like another slight improvement to what Monster is doing here that it could do is, so now this Zergling, well, now I think it's fully healed, because it is kind of being backed up by this patrolling Zergling.
Yeah.
But one of the things that eventually lets Stardust take this base is that the Zergling eventually dies, because it keeps getting attacked by the probe in retaliation. And then once it dies, it doesn't have an opportunity to get a new one there, because that cannon's going to finish. Yeah. So what if it swapped out the damaged Zergling for a fresh one every so often?
Absolutely. And actually, as that second Zergling was running around there, I thought that it was really clever that it could, you know, it could double up there. You know, you could have 1 Zergling that's running around denying the probe, and 1 Zergling that's staying burrowed there denying the placement of buildings. You know, you could have that 1 Zergling that was running around chase the probe, and the other one try to take down the cannon. But in this case, the cannon does come up, and it looks like I think Stardust has discovered the bottom left base now of Monster. It's bringing some army there. It hasn't. It's kind of stuck there. Yeah, there we go with the 65,000 APM. It's not able to decide how to approach this. Maybe still waiting for that observer to come back.
Yeah, and we've seen this before in the other games as well, where it knows there's the space here. It does not have an observer in the neighborhood, so these Dragoons don't want to get too close to these lurkers. And now the Dragoon or the observers are kind of coming in here now from the right, slowly but surely.
And I feel like Monster, I mean, if it notices that there's army so close to that expansion that it has, why doesn't it place a hatchery then, or start, sunken pushing to that ramp now? If it had started sunken pushing to that ramp by now, I think it could have been able to do so, but the observers are still not there, and somehow Monster managed to get one of those low ground bases at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, the observers are doing a little bit of a dance as well here. But yeah, the Sunkens are interestingly placed here. But again, like you were saying before, like this is not easy to defend no matter where you put those Sunkens.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any lurkers there actually. And interesting to see lurkers trying to push down the ramp now too. This is something that I didn't expect to see at all. This is, I think, the first time we've seen that, as the lurkers try to gain more territory in the natural. But there's no observers here. There's 3 observers, and none of them are in the proper locations for Stardust here.
Yeah, and that's something that, being a bot author myself, it's hard to really work that out as to where should my detection be. It seems sort of straightforward as a human player, but and when you're coding something in AI, it's not always as straightforward of how you move that detection there, because one of the things you can end up doing is moving all of your detection to a spot when you only need one of your detection there.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I do want to note that Stardust never did place that 12 o'clock base, so this is all the economy it really has here. Can we take a look at that 12 o'clock base real quick? Yeah, for some reason, it's still not...
Is that cannon blocking it? I think this cannon is blocking it.
That's possible, actually. I think that possibly could be it. Stardust with a little bit of a blunder there. I think any human player has blocked their Nexus before when trying to forge fast expand, but in this case, it could be a fatal mistake as Monster's taking the top right main as well. Stardust coming apart at the seams here.
Yeah, and Monster has now that Mutilus Cloud that we saw in the first game that was going ahead and picking off all of the workers. Stardust down to 25 workers, which should be enough to keep this natural saturated, but if it doesn't try to expand anywhere else, it's going to run out of money.
Yeah, and I mean, Monster has 65 workers now. That's pretty much the ideal number that you would want in a ZVP. It's even managing to take this mineral only here and throwing down some Sunkens. The slight shortcomings of Stardust play really getting exposed here. I think the fact that I guess, as you said before, the logic behind how bot authors approach this, Stardust has excelled in how to win games early, and Monster's whole tactic is, if I prevent Stardust from winning early, I have a great chance in the late game. So clearly, I think a lot more investment on Monster's behalf into this late game play, this positional style of play.
Yeah, and also, too, just taking advantage of, just finding holes in Stardust's logic for taking bases and exploiting that is really helping Monster. When it's able to do that and stall Stardust's climb to strength is when Monster seems to be most effective.
Yeah, and I mean Monster is now taking a lot of the map. It's taking the natural at the top right, I believe. Yep. There are a couple of units there. The lurkers are going to be able to hold it back, and yeah, just it's a few small mistakes that really, seem to undo Stardust. Not having observers where it needs to have them, not being able to expand for too long, or blocking its own expansion. And it does place down that mineral only expansion now, but I feel like the damage might have already been done here.
Yeah, and it's interesting too how, so if it was indeed blocking itself, like I think it was over here, which now there's a new Zergling plot there, we've seen cases where when it's being blocked by the enemy, after some number of tries, it tries to go to another base. It seems like if it was blocking itself, it doesn't have that same logic of, well, I tried enough times here, let me try somewhere else, because it just got stuck.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I mean, we've seen other AI authors, they lift their command center and place it better afterwards. We saw that funny game with Crazy who thought that a Nexus was a command center, so it placed it off center, thinking it would lift it later. But yeah, it seems that there are definite areas of improvement for Stardust, maybe particularly on this map if it's trying to take that 12 o'clock gas expansion. And looks like Monster is going to take this game and bring the series to 3-2.
Yeah, and I love too, like when Zerg takes over so much of the map as AI, and you just see this ridiculously long production line.
Yes, and also the stream of units on the mini map. It's they call it Sauron Zerg from back from when July popularized this playstyle. I think it was like 2006 or so. You just make a bunch of hatcheries and then a bunch of Zerglings and Hydralisks, and it is definitely effective in ZVP, as we see here.
And so with that, that will be the last building for Stardust Falling. We'll go ahead and get into game 6 it is, I believe.
Yes, it is. We're 3-2 now, and next game is going to be on Benzene. All right, in the top right, we have Stardust playing as the Purple Protoss on Benzene.
And down in the bottom left is Monster spawning as the Teal Zerg.
So this map is a two-player map. It's quite well known for its long rush distances, its high grounds in the middle. It was thought to be a little bit imbalanced for Terran, but thankfully we don't have that here. What we do have playing into this is the fact that there are no other mains for Monster to take. Probably the optimal base for Monster to take would be in the top left of the map here, because that does have a one ramp entrance, but it also does have that entrance that's kind of off to the side. We will see that later. So it's going to be interesting to see if Monster is able to hold on to a base here, which seems to be the determining factor in whether it makes it to the late game.
Yeah, and also I'm wondering, will it get that Zergling in time to burrow? This does have, for a two-player map, one of the longer distances between the two mains. And so we saw in the one game where, it wasn't able to delay that natural at all, did not work out well for Monster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am also kind of curious about this hatchery position. This seems a little bit too far away now. I mean, obviously, it doesn't have to be pressed up exactly up to the ramp, but this one seems like it's placed about as far as it was on the Jade map. Of course, it did work out on the Jade map, and the longer rush distance will mitigate any risk of this farther hatchery placement, but it makes me wonder. I know that we're doing this show match because of the fact that Monster is designed for these maps, these specific set of maps, this naming structure of maps. So I'm wondering if these are predetermined hatchery locations or if it's just kind of a vague area and this is just the extreme of it,
Yeah, because, something that we've kind of talked about on the Discord is, with building placement, how do you do it? Do you do it algorithmically? Is there any advantage to, say, generating a list of positions and having your AI use that? And for the most part, the consensus is that, it's just, and it does have the Zergling burrow there at the natural, I see now, is that, generating a list is very time consuming as a person, like as a human, because you would have to generate one for every single map that you want your AI to play on. Whereas if you, have some sort of algorithm to decide the placement, it may not be the most optimal, but it is the most bang for your buck in terms of time.
Yes.
So it is hard to say, because, like you said, the reason we're doing the show match is that the problem was the building placement was off due to the unexpected name differences in the maps that were used in the tournament. So does that mean that it just... are these pre-decided by the author per map, or is this, still an algorithm at work, but the algorithm was thrown off because it was maybe different for each map?
Yeah, and I honestly think that for a build such as this, which is so heavily dependent on placement, I think that is a situation where the investment into having a predetermined structure could be beneficial. In this case, I mean, look at the sunken placement too. It's not making a concave, it's kind of making a double layer, which has benefits of its own, but I think it's almost leaving the door open for someone to just run past and try to do some damage that way, or to set up a concave of Dragoons to take down those front ones, because Stardust does eventually get to a number of Dragoons where I think it can bust up the ramp. It just lacks the confidence to do so.
Yeah, one thing that kind of scares me about this setup, like you said with the run by, so before this lurker came out and was down, if this army had just said, you know what, screw it, and just ran around the edge and just gone straight for the drones. Now, the drones could burrow, though. So...
Yeah, but those are all the drones you have. If you burrow them, you're not getting any money, right? So you better be able to win with the Hydras and Zerglings you have out. Especially now that it takes the only two lurkers it has, it takes them away. Now, one thing that I've been the first time I saw this, my initial instinct was, oh my god, it's going to do a lurker drop and this is going to be incredible, right? And I really wish that it continued with this drop tech further into the mid game. Especially on a map like Benzene, another feature of this map that makes it famous is the fact that there is that high ground behind the mineral line. The Overlord now on the left-hand side is scouting it. There is a power generator there that kind of prevents you from being able to run in there, but you can easily drop some lurkers back there. And I think that could be a brutal tactic to slow down Stardust even further.
Yeah, and if you leave that Overlord there for some sight vision, or vision down there, then that makes those lurkers even more powerful. Now instead of taking one of the corner bases, Monster has elected to take the base that's right next door.
Yeah.
Which has a wider ramp, I believe. Actually, no, it's the same size ramp.
Yeah, no, now that you mention it, I almost completely forgot about the fact that this is a one ramp base right here, and this actually is definitely better than the top left now where that Zergling is running around, because there are two entrances to that. There are, of course, two ramps. There is a really narrow choke to use that bottom ramp there at the top left, but it's still more risky than the base that Monster did end up taking. And now that I'm looking at it, these Sunkens, because of the fact that they're placed next to the hatchery as they are on other maps, the small size of this expansion actually benefits Monster quite a lot, I think.
Yeah, so seems to be a little bit of a mix-up here with the Hydralisks, losing some of them on the high ground here as they're continuing to engage with the Dragoons for some reason there. But, I mean, I don't think it's a good trade for Monster, but they are taking a few Dragoons out there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, despite the fact that they're both on two bases now, and neither one of them wants to lose a lot of, units and therefore money, I think it's only a matter of time until Stardust does take that bottom right base. The one thing that should be noted, though, is this travel distance is actually quite far to take this bottom right base. So that means that the Zergling heals longer. It takes longer for the probe to get there. That means that it's possible that this gets delayed an extra, 5-6 times, right? So I think that could be a big factor. And I'm sorry, the Hydras move out here when the as the Dragoons try to go take out that expansion.
Yeah, and I was going to mention too that Stardust is trying to take, and it has now plopped down the Nexus, the mirror base for this one. Mm-hmm. But it was being denied for a bit there as well by the patrolling Zerg.
Yeah, the Dragoons actually managed to make it up here. So even with the Sunkens being placed in somewhat better location, it still wasn't quite good enough and not high enough number. I really feel that it's, again, a repeat of the situation where I think if Monster invested as many Sunkens as it does in its main base, it could definitely be effective here. And we see the Hydras, they're trying to come out. It's going to depend who's going to make a better concave here. So far as the Dragoons, but the Hydras have a nice natural here. The drones are getting blocked from placing Sunkens, and it's going to run all the way back to its main base. That's a huge loss for Monster, but it is attacking the probes in the third base for Stardust now.
Yeah, and okay, I see the Mutalisk cloud now. So yeah, Monster is right on the verge of its game plan of getting those Mutalisks out and getting those Mutalisks to damage the economy and sort of confuse the army of Stardust. I think so he is going ahead and trying to retake this base, though the
doesn't have money. He doesn't have money for it.
Yeah.
Oh my god, no. That's so heartbreaking here. I really feel like this map could have been a great opportunity for Monster. It just slight tweaks could really have fixed this build to work here.
Yeah, and actually, I'm a little bit surprised this replay does not desync, because there is a lot of Dragoon stacking happening there.
Well, you never know. And I think it also comes down to the fact that if you look, the layout of the Sunkens here for Monster is just not ideal. They kind of mirror the terrain feature of the high ground itself, right? So if you see this diagonal that the ramp is on, the Sunkens mirror that. We saw this on J2. They weren't in a concave, they were kind of in a vertical line, the same way that the terrain is. So I think maybe that's the determining factor. It has a certain amount of units spaced away from the terrain edge, perhaps. I think that's what we're seeing here, but I do think that a concave would still be better, and if it was closer to that ramp as well.
Yeah, I think something that could have helped it too is something that I've noticed is Monster doesn't seem to produce any army really out of the second base that it takes. Mm-hmm. And so all it had really are the two lurkers that it drops and then the Sunkens it had there. If it had units, then Stardust may have been a bit more indecisive about coming up there than it was to take out those Sunkens.
Especially, and even Zerglings, because Zerglings take so many hits to die to Dragoons, because they take half damage from Dragoons, so it would take like three shots at least, maybe even 4 from a Dragoon, and that's if we consider the fact that it's shooting uphill, that number jumps to like 8 shots to kill one Zergling by a Dragoon. That's a lot of time spent within sunken lurker range. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. Even throwing in 6 Zerglings could have been enough to hold that base a little while longer. But the Mulisks are trying in vain to deny yet another base, but I think the writing's on the wall here. That's why I set it up a little bit, and I think that monster's going to GG out here quite soon.
Yeah, it's just gonna take a little bit, I think, because Stardust is really low. Like, I mean, one of the things that AI are really great at is spending their money. You often don't see them floating too much money, but now Stardust has finally kind of broken that front there in some of those sunkens and does get Monster to call the GG.
Yes, 4-2 now for Stardust. 1 win away from winning the show match, but again, we are going to be casting every single game. And yeah, let's move on to the next map.
And for our game 6 here, we have Monster spawning as the blue Zerg on the top left of Empire of the Sun.
And in the bottom right, we have Stardust as the purple Protoss, also on Empire of the Sun. So, this game, we originally had Andromeda slated to be played on this map, because what's very interesting is that both of these AI, they're quite unique in the fact that they both know how to handle island expansions, including the mineral patch that we'll see on Monster's point of view here at 12 o'clock. There's a mineral patch that is placed on these bases. This is so that Terrans can't just make a command center and fly over there without having a dropship and a worker to mine that mineral patch out. Now, island bases have been ignored for a long time in the AI world, as far as I know, and it's only in the past year or so that AI have started to take those bases. Now, what happened on Andromeda, according to the guy who, Purple Wave, who ran these games for us so that we wouldn't be spoiled, thank you, shoutouts to Purple Wave, that the game stalled out, which means that it ran for 60 minutes and there was no clear winner. So our suspicion was that maybe one of the AI took an island, or both AI took an island, and neither one of them knew how to handle the situation. Now, what's interesting is we know for a fact that Empire of the Sun did not stall out, even though it does have that island base as well. So I think that if, as far as builds go, this is the map that is perhaps one of the most ripe for Monster strategy to work out, because it doesn't even need to bring the lurkers to that island base in order to take control of it.
Yeah, and and one of the reasons why we are casting a game on Empire of the Sun as opposed to Andromeda is that so Purple Wave used the SC Docker to run these games for us, and when that timeout gets hit, SC Docker does not produce a replay file for use. So unfortunately, the replays of those games were not available to us. And what was funny was Chobo chose Empire of the Sun, said, okay, let's try Empire of the Sun, and forgot that there were island map expansions. So thankfully, it still worked out.
Yeah, they're very rarely used in human play that I've completely forgot about them. I've played on this map dozens of times, and I did not remember at all. Whereas on Andromeda, it was kind of hitting during that time when in PvZ, you could often see say a Reaver into Carrier, to which island play really lends itself, and that's partially because of the fact that there's a safe mineral expansion on Andromeda that you don't have here on Empire of the Sun. One other thing that you don't have here on Empire of the Sun is you don't have a ramp. And if you notice, this choke is actually bigger than it is on Taucross. On Taucross, it is the size of a pylon. Here, it is the size of a gateway or barracks. So this makes it perhaps one of the riskiest maps for Monster to go for this build outside of reverse ramp maps like Jade.
Yeah, and to speak a little bit about the island expansions as well, one of the reasons why, again, in the AI scene that they've been largely ignored is, the principle of, well, what's going to give me the most reward for my time investment, which we've talked about earlier in this cast. And island maps really don't give you a huge amount of reward. Typically in human play, you don't see them taking a whole lot until like the games are going long term, or there's no real other expansion that you can take easily. So at that point, you move on to the island expansions. So it's sort of the same thing in AI play. Adding that logic to take that island expansion is not going to give you a huge gain, so why spend your time developing it?
Yeah, and it must be also incredibly complicated, and from a logic standpoint, you not only have to recognize the fact that you have to use a transporting unit. If for Zerg's case, you have to get the tech to get the transportation. You have to drop a worker there to mine that mineral out, and it has to know that it can't just plop down a hatchery there. and there's a lot of complicating factors here. I'm not happy about this hatchery placement for Monster, though. I think it's going to hemorrhage a lot of money yet again here, trying to place a hatchery in harm's way, basically.
Yeah, it is really strange, especially because now I could see if maybe it was like a little bit, if it was right up against the Sunkens, I could see its placement being kind of useful because it could kind of act like, how when Zergs build the wall when they do like a fast expand. But in this case, it's in a position where the Sunkens are not able to fire at all.
Yeah, and generally you do want a wall, but that's because you want to do that against Zealot openings. Now, if one of the ways that Protoss can abuse the fact that you walled is by going Dragoons, actually. It was like a really, how should I say, non-meta approach to PvZ for a short bit of time. Like, there wasn't that many, if any, pro games that really highlighted it, but it was called a Kodra, which is Corsair Dragoon. You use Dragoons to punish the Zerg for making these, making walls using their evolution chambers and their Hydralisk dens and their hatcheries and their natural. You go for a bunch of Dragoons, you bust that down, and the Corsairs protect you from Mutalisks. We do see Monster has taken that island expansion, and it's taking the third base.
But it doesn't have the money to do it.
Yeah, but this is the evolution of the build right here, and I strongly doubt that Stardust is ever going to drop on the high ground on the island here, because there is a high ground here that could be really annoying. I've seen people place cannons there. I've seen people, place Dragoons there, siege tanks there. I don't think it's going to happen here, so I think that this base is going to be like the first time that Monster has a stress-free expansion in this whole series.
Yeah, where Monster is struggling right now, though, is it wants to take that third, and because it threw away so much money trying to get that hatchery, it just doesn't have the money to place it. That third is still not down.
And it should be noted that Stardust has also taken its island. It already has mined a bunch of minerals. It's ready to drop them off as soon as the Nexus completes. And one other thing that I want to know is look at the position of these Hydras. This is some sort of like Brood War art that I'm seeing here. The Hydras are making a perfect concave, inverted concave here to I guess like if there is a run by or something, maybe. I don't know what the logic is behind it, but it's kind of awesome.
I wonder if it's something, so like something that some authors might do is like, okay, well, I want to defend this choke point here, so I'm gonna move my units to the center point of that choke point, and then once they're at a certain distance, stop. So I wonder if it's something reverse of that, where I want to defend this layer, so but stay a certain distance from it, and that just sort of naturally starts to form a circle around it. Now we do have an attempt to move in here by Stardust, committing more to the attack. Yeah,
and I think that has to come back to the fact that Monster does have the economy to hold this. Now the third base has been discovered by Stardust. Stardust is going to reroute its whole army there. The Sunkens aren't even up yet, and the Observer is going to be there in support. So definitely dire times for Monster here. I think it's going to lose the third base, but the Hydralisks, they were thinking about coming in from behind. I think that it was just a little bit too late, I think.
Yeah, so it recognized, the army has moved away, so I can come out now, but then it decided to abandon that base before the Hydralisks even made it to the transition to low ground. But a Lurker getting caught out of position here.
Yeah, right before the army was able to come and support it. I think that this high ground is extremely broad, but if we look at the way that Stardust is moving up it is kind of still doing that single file line that we saw on Taucross, and if it is able to hold its natural here, no, it bails on it, decides not to. This is kind of what I was alluding to earlier. It's kind of like, instead of like Monster wants to draw the game out, it's like, okay, I'm gonna fall back and I'll try again next time, right? But I almost feel like if you know that this expansion is make or break for you, maybe you should try to hold it and see if maybe you can hold on to it, because you never know, it could happen if you're going for an all-in, and like you're going for a 4 pool and you have 6 Zerglings and you see that they already cannoned up, you have to just go with it. You don't want to waste that time. But I do think it's interesting that Monster, we were thinking about how Monster,
the Mutalisks are out.
Yeah, we would think about how Monster was benefiting from this island expansion, but it's actually Stardust who managed to get a third base earlier than it perhaps would with all these burrowed Zerglings everywhere. We see a pylon already at the bottom right third, but yeah, the Mutalisks are out too, and actually this is going to hurt the island economy here from Stardust quite a lot.
Yeah, because especially with the only thing that can defend this is, I don't think it ever gets Corsairs, is these 2 cannons that are here. So this is probably going to be a very bad spot where it's going to bleed workers and bleed minerals there. Now Stardust may be thinking about busting into that main, but not quite doing so. Monster was right, and Monster was able to get this top right expansion going again. So I think the island, this stress-free expansion is still really working out for Monster.
And I see the observer is following the same situation it had in Talcross. It's flying in. It's like, okay, I know the lurker's there. Then it sees the Mutalisk. It's like, okay, that's dangerous. And then it's like, no, I'm gonna fall back. So the lurkers actually took a couple of hits whenever the observer was just in range. But now the observer is actually getting farther and farther away from that choke because of the presence of the Mutas and Hydras there.
Yeah, and something you were talking about before where, Monster is playing a little bit more passively than you would like, where, it's doing that fall back and abandoning bases. You see that sometimes in an extreme form with AI where the army will be in the main as the main is dying and refusing to engage.
Yes, I've played on Schnail where, against some of the AI that make like 100 Zerglings, right? Once I get 12 Zealots with +1 attack and speed, they're like, okay, my 100 Zerglings can't take this fight, so I'm just going to run all the way back to my main and die. That's basically what happens, and I think that it does make sense. It's something that we recently had discussions about in the Schnail Discord with Purple Wave and one of the people who was working on expanding how humans and AI work, Felipe Carvalho. They were discussing how the logic behind whether or not to take an engagement is often quite faulty for AI. So I think erring on the side of safety does have its merits. In this case, Stardust is demonstrating why maybe it should err on the side of safety as it keeps entering this meat grinder here.
Ooh,
and Monster, managed to take the bottom left as well.
Yeah, and you're talking about the meat grinder. I went back to it, and I just noticed there was a lurker at the choke of the natural, and then the 2 lurkers up at the choke of the main.
Ooh.
And so
I didn't notice that.
a huge chunk of the army just fell there because they did not know where to go.
Yeah, and Stardust, the supply is quite close to Monsters at this point. It's not a supply that you'd want to be at. I mean, Monster is going to lose this bottom left base, but at the same time, it is looking to establish its natural to its main base. Maybe looking to establish the other natural as well. And also another behavior I wanted to point out is if you look at 12 o'clock, there's 2 spore colonies there, I'm sorry, and all the overlords are there. They're like, okay, this is the safe place. This is where they can't come and attack us.
Yeah, if you just dove a few Corsairs in there, you would be able to get them before the Corsairs die, probably. But yeah, Monster is feeling a lot more confident, though. Its army is actually out on the map a little bit, though it is now falling back to this natural. But while the bottom left was falling, the army of Monster went and cleared some Dragoons that were harassing the top right, and then started the march towards Stardust space. These Mutalisks have really been keeping the worker count in check, and now Stardust only one mining base, this island down at the bottom.
Yeah, and Stardust, it seems like it doesn't realize, like, it's not trying to send the probes to that island base because it knows it can't get there, but it's not trying to take a new base for it either. Well, I mean, technically it is, but the Zergling is actually still there denying it at the bottom right. And now there's a Hydra there too. If it takes down that pylon, I don't think Stardust is going to be able to get enough money to place a cannon and a Nexus anytime soon.
Yeah, and so it's so fascinating too that these are like the 2 AI that really utilize island bases. They're playing each other. And the island base seems to be working more in the favor of Monster in this case. I mean, the island base is also keeping Stardust in it because Stardust does still have an income thanks to it.
Yes.
But really, it plays more in the favor of Monster to have this island base that Stardust has not touched at all.
One other thing to note is like Monster and Stardust both made defense on their islands. And Monster did harass with Mutalisks there, right? But it doesn't seem that Stardust has any intention of ever attacking that island itself, or never did. It had to make a shuttle in order to take that island, but I don't think it's ever going to transport units. And like I said before, if you ferried maybe even a probe or some Dragoons onto that high ground behind the gas, that could have hurt the mining, it could have hurt the gas economy for sure, and it just didn't materialize that way. But it is still a somewhat tight game. I mean, Stardust is still ahead.
Stardust just threw a good chunk of its army away, though, at the main.
Yeah, and if it finds this bottom left base again, I think that Monster might run out of money quite soon, too. I mean, obviously we have a slight spoiler in the fact that we know that it's not going to time out, and that we have to have a winner in this game, so it's looking like Monster might have it, but it's not 100% for sure yet, I think.
Well, Monster still has a decent amount of minerals, more so than Stardust has. Actually, the island base for Stardust is just mined out, so Stardust is completely out of income. It is saving 400 minerals to maybe get a Nexus down somewhere, but there's nowhere safe for it to take that Nexus.
And again, this is a situation where the engagement logic, right? Like, Stardust, if it had just realized that it can take its foot off the gas for just a moment, to take its own base. You know, like pull back. I don't know, maybe 6 dragoons and a zealot, right? You can take an island. I'm sorry, you can take an expansion so much easier than with trying to continuously put up a cannon against a zergling that's burrowed there and a hydra and some mutas as well. So definitely a mix of being perhaps a little too passive with being a little too aggressive at the same time from either player here.
Yeah, and actually, speaking about that, you know, something that I have in the AI that I wrote, which obviously is not anywhere near as good as these two, but something that it does is any units that are assigned for defense when it decides to take an expansion, it sends to that expansion along with the unit that's going to build it. So even if they don't necessarily stay there after it starts to get established, if there were anything there to fight, you know, those army units will be there for at least a moment, like you're talking about, to try and help support getting that expansion started.
Yeah, and I think that that's a prudent decision. On top of that, that's how humans play. And you know, when you send a probe to your third base to try to take an expansion, you bring some dragoons along so that the vultures don't snipe it on the way there. It makes perfect sense to me. And the fifth base now for Monster does get scattered by Stardust. It did split off about 6 dragoons here to take that down, but I feel like, again, those 6 dragoons might have been better served in trying to take its own expansion here. Should be noted that, I mean, the observer is there now, is going to see this zergling there. It knows that it's there. It could send it. The dragoons look like they were thinking about going back, but yeah.
Oh no, this drone slaughter. That's, oh no, okay, they're going to the bottom left. I was afraid that they were going back to the main, where Stardust is now making another attempt to bust in. It really should not be doing that while it does not have any income.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it needs to. It needed to hold that position, like somewhat passively, in order to establish an expansion for it. But yeah, the Mutalisks are running around the main base doing damage. The dragoons that are pulled back are not enough to handle it, and now Monster is ahead in supply. Well, it was for a moment, but it is ahead in army supply for sure, and that is going to spell the doom of a dragoon-heavy Protoss army.
Yeah, I think when these Mutalisks are getting into the main, it's causing the army to want to pull back. And that sort of took the cork off of the bottle, essentially, that was Monster, where as soon as those Dragoons pulled back, Monster's army just spilled forth, because this Monster was destroying the second natural on the right here, well, the first one that Monster was taking. You know, I was wondering, well, where is Monster's army? Because it still had decent supply count. I'm like, but I don't see any army other than, like, there was a Hydralisk hanging outside of Stardust base, and there was the Mutalisks with the Scourge. Where they were was they were just trapped in the main because they couldn't yet take care of the force that Stardust had. But then Stardust threw that into the main, which cleaned up a good chunk of it, and then felt the need to pull it all back to save the main. And when it did that, Monster was able to just spill out and just clean up.
And you make a great point about shifting priorities and how difficult it must be to code for that for an AI. One thing I read Purple Wave saying in the Discord is that you know, the way that Dragoons position themselves to take down a bunker, for example, in PvT, you know, it's a very precise location where you have to stand with a Dragoon where it's not getting hit, but it's hitting the bunker. And it's not something that you memorize. It's not something that the AI memorizes. It's like a Goldilocks thing. It's like, okay, too hot, too cold, just right. You know, you go forward until you get hit once. You pull back a little bit, then you move forward a little bit less than the last time. So those micro decisions, right? I feel like combined with shifting priorities, that's what causes Stardust to run into that meat grinder, because it's like, okay, now I have to go back and defend my main. Oh, well, no, never mind. Actually, it's important for me to be here. Okay, let me see how far I can go in. Oops, I got hit, you know? So I think that a combination of those shifting priorities and that attempting to find that Goldilocks zone is what causes Stardust to lose so many units in those situations.
Yeah, and something that I was wondering, although I think, so if this game had played out differently and Stardust had cleaned everything except for the island base, I think Monster would at some point GG when it's like low on army units or runs out of army units.
Yeah.
Mainly because we've seen it do those GGs before. But like, I wonder what happened in those games in Andromeda, because I wonder if it just became more of a stalemate between the two because they both were able to secure some island bases, you know, safely, or was it, you know, originally earlier in this game, I was thinking maybe it was that Stardust cleared the map but never attacked the island, and so maybe Monster just sat there until the timeout. But I don't think Monster would do that. Yeah,
that's a situation where programming a GG timing might actually be what's called
disadvantageous.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think in this case, we actually are going to go to 60 minutes. If it's trying to kill every single probe, is that going to determine who's going to win here? Is 60 minutes, 1 hour? It's still going. Okay.
Well,
Interesting.
so I think it's, if I'm remembering right, the SE Docker, it does 60 real time minutes, but the game
That would make
plays
sense.
as fast as it possibly can.
Uh-huh. Wow. Okay, so this was down to the wire then, for a timeout here potentially.
Well,
It,
I'll take a look at the in-game time too. The other thing is too that so there are some differences between OpenBW and what Remaster will show as the length of a game. I forget which one is usually a little bit longer than the other, and I'm not sure exactly what the cause of difference is there. But so, for example, like if it's running the game as fast as possible, this hour and 2 minutes here is how long it took based on frame count, I think. Whereas in real time, that might have been faster. It probably would have been way faster than an hour.
I see. I see what you're saying. So you're thinking that Purple Wave meant an hour in like actual computation time, like frame count wise, right? As opposed to the in-game speed, right?
Well, no, I think so. And Purple Wave can correct me if I'm wrong because he's most likely watching this. But what I think it is the SC Docker does 60 minutes real time. If a game takes real time 60 minutes, it considers it as timed out. But
Okay, I got you now.
that
All
60
right.
minutes real time could be 3 hours game time.
I see. I see. Yes.
I'm not.
That's kind of what I meant. I see what
Yeah,
you're saying now.
I think
Okay.
Purple Wave will probably correct me if I'm wrong on that.
All right. Well, this brings our series up to 4-3, by the way. So I'm ready to move on to the next map.
Let's do it.
All right. Here at 12 o'clock on Neo Moonglaive, we have Stardust spawning as the orange Protoss.
And down toward the bottom right, we have Monster as the white Zerg, and with the score being 4-3 in Stardust's favor. If Stardust can win, it will win the show match, and Monster still need to win this game plus the next one.
Yep, the Overlord is scouting in the correct direction already, but we already know that Monster does like to send out that early drone early on. I feel like this is something where if we had a learning aspect to these AI, and actually it's scouting in a really interesting pattern. I guess maybe it was looking to see if there was a proxy there or something. I don't know. But maybe Monster would know that it doesn't have to scout so early, and so would Stardust. Of course, scouting is always important. It's perhaps more important in human play because of the fact that humans are unpredictable, right? But in this case, I think both AI, if they were human players, they would know. They would be well aware of what the other is doing by now.
Yeah, an interesting placement of the hatchery here has me a little bit worried, although I don't think that Stardust will take advantage of it, but it looks like it may be reachable from the very edge of this. Maybe it might require the Dragoon upgrade, but that could be a problem. And again, we are seeing this distance from the ramp again with the hatchery.
Yeah, I think maybe that to the left and just a couple units lower, that area right there, I think that might be Dragoon rangeable, but I'm not 100% sure. However, yeah, again, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays its Sunkens this time, if it is going to conform to the shape of the base itself, more so than the ramp's location again. First Zergling now coming out to hopefully get burrowed at the natural of Stardust.
Yeah, and just checking, Burrow's not quite finished yet, but should finish in time. The Dragoons are about halfway done. Burrow, yep, is going to finish before those Dragoons pop out.
Yeah, and the Zergling staying slightly out of position there until it's time for it to burrow. I guess in case any units do come out and try to snipe it while it's there in the vulnerable spot there.
Yeah, and that timing is pretty tight between Burrow finishing it and the Dragoons popping out and that army moving out. And so I think in that one game where Monster failed to to hide that Zergling there in the natural,
yeah,
I think it was just because that timing is so tight that map probably didn't quite work out in Monster's favor there.
Yeah, and again, I'm firmly convinced that it's a certain amount of distance away from the edge of the main base here, because we see that third sunken placed one unit lower, kind of the same way that there's a dip under the ramp to the right of it.
Yep.
So you see it's kind of mirroring the terrain of the what's called the main base to create, I guess, what is the optimal sunken range for the ramp area, as opposed to making a concave with it.
Yeah, and it is interesting too. It's not like it's a focal point like when we were just discussing how units kind of like how these hydralisks here are starting that arc. So it's got like a center point of the layer here that it's keeping a distance from. But instead of being a center point of the ramp, it's just sort of like along the topography, along the edge here.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how, I mean, because this had to be coded, you know, it's not something that, you know, like a human player can place down buildings willy-nilly wherever they feel like it, and I'm actually kind of puzzled by that idle drone that we're looking at right now. But yeah, it's clear what the coder was thinking when they created the logic for how to place these sunkens, right?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Is this natural gonna... Okay, I wasn't sure with that cannon if it was necessarily blocking it or not, but it wasn't.
Yeah, the cannons, you can place 1.5 cannons between a nexus and a mineral in any direction.
Okay.
Yes, so this is pretty much perfect. I think the nexus... Yeah, I think this is the right place. It seems kind of awkward because the mineral line isn't exactly in the right place relative to where the nexus is.
But it's as close to the gas as it can get.
Yeah, it's as close to the gas as it can get, which is the crucial deciding factor, generally speaking. And yeah, the probes again are going to be dancing their way for the nexus to finish. It should be soon.
Yep, so it does that transfer a little bit early, and then I like, though, that it does keep those workers instead from, you know, going back all the way to the main nexus and potentially losing time having to come back. It keeps them next to the nexus.
No, yeah, absolutely. It's probably the most optimal approach available, especially considering the fact that Stardust it starts making those additional probes early, whereas you don't need 30+ workers to fully saturate the main base. Because you only need 2 workers per mineral patch to properly saturate. Yeah, this is really... oh no, it blocked itself again. And this is actually really crucial too, because this is delaying this hatchery is also delaying the sunkens that eventually places there. So it's gonna have...
It's not unburrowing the Zergling. It has the money.
Last time I did it pretty quickly. Last time it only took like just a couple of pivots there, but this time it's really struggling to do so, and this could be huge.
Yeah, this is not looking good for Monster with it not being able to take that. And it does have Zerglings up along this left side here. So this third, now it looks like there was a probe over there at the side of the mine, and it's kind of struggling.
Yeah, it's going to place down that pylon probably soon, but if it delays its pylon placement also, could possibly play out. Did the hatchery still not get placed? I don't think so.
It's still not there.
Oh, that's tough. That is tough.
Meanwhile, the army for Stardust is growing like it normally does, but not able to get up there just yet. This probe is not placing a pylon, though, so both bots kind of struggling in a way that we don't normally see them struggle in this matchup.
Yeah, and this is going to definitely hurt Monster more than it does Stardust. It needs that second base, it needs that second gas. The pylon finally plays down for Stardust. It's winning the race, but the Zergling is still there to deny. That drone, is it the same drone that's idle there at the natural hatchery? I'm sorry, at the ramp hatchery for Monster?
Yeah, that drone is still there.
It's just chilling. Maybe, I don't think it got trapped. I don't think so.
I wonder if it's maybe was trying to place a sunken somewhere that it doesn't actually fit.
Yeah, that could be it.
I mean, you should be able to get another sunken here and another one here, but I don't know.
Not the second one, but the first one I think you can definitely do. The second one, if you look to the sunken to the right of it, I think that one...
yeah, it's one over in the way.
Yeah.
So...
Yes. Neither AI doing as well in this game as they did in the past, but the hatchery finally does get placed at the second base there. It took some time there, but it is finally down. The third base is still not down for Stardust. I see it running around with the probe on the mineral line there. The probe has scared the Zergling away. The Zergling's trying to recover enough energy enough HP to fight that probe, but by the time it gets to the cannon, it will be too late, and the third base is going to come up for Stardust before the second base of Monster, and I have to feel that gives Stardust a huge advantage in this game.
Yeah, because what Monster's really trying to do is delay your expansions while I take mine through rather unorthodox manner, which is going... So, because it's doing it in such a strange way, Monster's expansions are slower, so it wants to slow down Stardust's expansions as well. And because it slowed itself down with that burrowed Zergling, it not as effective. Now, we do have the 4 Dragoons that are coming in.
Yeah, no observer, as we've seen before yet, but it does seem to be aware of that position. The observer probably hovered over it at some point. There are 2 observers on the map now, so in theory there should be 1 for each group of army. I see the drone is there was a drone with gas there. I think it was maybe thinking of placing another sunken, or maybe it's thinking about trying to take the natural. Zerglings are coming forward. As I mentioned before, shooting uphill against Zerglings is very, very ineffective for Dragoons. So definitely a big boost to the ability to defend there. Maybe that drone is going to go for expansion. It is funny that we're consistently seeing those gas drones being used for this. And now that I'm looking at it, the pocket base, or the base that's directly beneath the main base of Monster, not that one, but the one to the right, yes, that one could be a candidate for another decent expansion placement.
Yeah, I'm kind of following this one because I think you were right. I think that drone was trying to, but now the whole army is coming over to this side of the map, so that's not good. Although it is allowing now Monster to spill out and kind of pull the army back.
And this is a situation where this map is the unique feature is the fact that the naturals on the reverse of high ground ramps, so like it hurts Monster because it's not going to be able to take a good fight against the army that's holding it back. And I love the way that Stardust split up its army here. It's basically a perfect split here. It has enough to hold the front of Monster. It has enough to take down the second base of Monster. And yeah, this is going to be a big loss for Monster here, as I'm sure that the mineral line is starting to look scant for Monster in its main base.
Yeah, and now this base is, the Nexus will be finishing pretty soon, so Stardust will be up to 3 bases. I don't think this is going to be able to bust into the main just yet, but I'm just kind of trying to see if there's any overlords or any sort of activity to try and get a second established. It looks like it's blocked itself again up here, or maybe not. No, it just doesn't have the money for it.
Yeah,
okay.
The main is run dry, and I think that that's going to be the series for Stardust here. It's going to go up 5-3 here with no more money left for Monster to mine anywhere comfortably.
Yeah,
yeah, unfortunately, I think this is going to be GG for Monster. But at least it should be said that it definitely performed better than it did in SSCAIT against Stardust. But Stardust, I think, should also be happy to be able to beat this version of Monster, or at least on this map, on this version of the maps as well.
Yeah, and so something that can kind of happen too, and I have this running at 4 speed now since Monster does not have a mining base at this time, is, there's definitely a competitive advantage to submitting as close to the deadline of the tournament as possible, yes. Especially if you're going to do something like this where you're going to pull a whole new build against an opponent that you are expecting to be seeing in the elimination phase.
Yes.
But you run a huge risk where what happened with Monster, where the map names were unexpectedly different for Monster, and so that threw the build off. So there is definitely a trade to have there with, trying to pull a surprise like this, but also you don't really get to test as much, and so things can kind of go awry for you.
Absolutely, and it should also be noted that according to what we were told is that the reason why there was an issue is because the version of the map pack that you can download and run at home had spaces in the map names, whereas the one that is used by SSCIT does not have those spaces. However, that is something that you would have been able to determine, right? So again, this and it's also something that you could code for, because correct me if I'm wrong, Purple Wave in the chat, I believe Purple Wave said that they identify maps by the hash, which is like some hidden information about the map, not the map name itself, which is an important distinction, and it is what allows Purple Wave to perform regardless of whether there are spaces or not. And for Monster, it causes a mistake like we saw in SSCIT because of the way that they coded for maps in the first place. So perhaps there is a better way that they could have coded for the maps in general.
Yeah, and Monster is also not the first bot to fall to something like that. I know in other years, there have been instances where, for example, Microwave, I almost said microwave when I meant to say Microwave, had a number wrong in its code, so it would never cast Storm. They were able, I think, to catch that one very last minute and sort of thought they could fix it, but in the end, I think it still had some bugs and such. So it's not like Monster is the first or the only or the last to run into these type of problems. But it is just something to be aware of if you're writing a bot to participate in the tournament, that, testing is very important. And while you can get that competitive edge by pulling a surprise on your opponent, you do run risks with trying to pull a surprise as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will talk about that a little bit more as we go through the next game.
Yes, so even though Stardust has won the show match with this win, winning it 5-3, we do want to cast the last one, so let's go ahead and jump into that. And for the game 9 here between these two in the show match, we have Monster spawning as the... is that teal or green?
Teal.
Okay, teal Zerg up at the top left of La Mancha.
And in the bottom left, we have Stardust as the orange Protoss. So the reason why I confidently answered that it was teal is because there is now green and lime green in Remastered also. So just in case we have any viewers who are more used to, I don't know, playing 3v3 BGH, this is classically teal.
Yeah,
but,
and also, so these games are also run for the bot AI in 1.16, which means they can't choose custom colors, and I think green is not available on desert maps, right?
I don't know about desert maps. I know that there is an extended color palette even within Brood War that you are allowed to do, but I don't think that applies to any of the pro maps, especially not any of the Kespa maps that are from, back in like 2009, I believe, for La Mancha. They do with the standard 8-player palette, but some BGH versions, even in 1.16, had like black or green. So, but beyond that, what I wanted to talk about is that, yes, indeed, part of the reason why we're doing this show match in the first place is because the fact that I spoke to McGrave. They messaged me to find out whether or not we'd be replaying the series. They told me about their situation, about how it was an AIIDE, I believe, where they replayed a bunch of games because of the fact that there was some issue like that. So definitely not unheard of for there to be situations like that. It is unfortunate that it played out that way in SSCAIT, but in exchange, we get this nice treat of a long best of 9 between these two players instead of the best of 7 that we had in SSCIT.
Yeah, and I think it's exciting too because it is, while we're seeing essentially the same build go up against the same build each game, the map features really make this matchup play out differently. I mean, going 5-3, that's, it wasn't a blowout, it wasn't, 5-0, and it might even end 5-4 depending on how this game goes. So, it's just very entertaining, or at least for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, no offense to anyone involved, including us, because the first two series, they were just not as entertaining as this one, I think. The first one was entertaining because I was like, whoa, what is this build, right? And then when it didn't work, you kind of feel like, I guess, But now that you see it working specifically on certain maps and with certain terrain features, you see this is what they were thinking, this is what they must have seen when playtesting this build. And we actually see Stardust committing quite heavily here this time, but no, it gets pushed back, and that was actually quite a significant number of losses for Stardust there.
Yeah, and it did significantly more damage to the Sunkens, but I think this is why, in this early game, it is smarter for it to fall back, because even if it had fully committed, Monster has the resources to be able to replace these Sunkens very quickly, and also to produce some Hydralisks very quickly to be able to say, well, okay, so you killed a couple of them, but you're not going to be able to kill me.
Yeah, and there's actually a probe here, combat probe with this army. I'm interested to see what it would do here. Maybe it's thinking of expanding to take this natural, which is something that we have not seen attempted, but I think could actually work really, really well, because this is the only bases that the Zerglings never come to deny, right? So imagine if Stardust throws down a Nexus here. That could be something.
That would be pretty funny. I wonder, though, if this is just the initial scout, and it's just happened to get out and or survive from the main, and now it's just kind of chilling there. It is strange to see it there. This is the first game where we've seen it, but I think that might be the scout.
Yeah. It's also interesting that it's not getting any further commands, right? So, for example, in Age of Empires 2...
There, it moved a little.
Okay. There's even a button that you can access as a human player. You press the period button, and it shows you, it moves your screen to the idle worker that you have, right? So in this case, I think that if I was playing here, that would be really useful, right? But I would expect AI to maybe be able to keep better track of their workers and not have any idle. And that's why I'm always surprised to see that there are any. And I guess that's because there is none of that functionality in Brood War itself to just immediately find the worker that's not doing anything, right?
Right. Well, and remember that the AI works fundamentally different from how a human player would play this. So the camera position does not matter to an AI.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have map hacks in that, if an area is dark to it, it can't see anything there. but it doesn't have to move a camera there to interact with the units that are there, which is one of the reasons why the AI is able to have such a high APM in games, is that it's able to issue an order to every single unit on the map, regardless of where they are, every single frame.
Yeah.
Which is something that a human player is limited by the UI that they have in front of them. And just to comment too on what you were talking about a little bit earlier with the entertainment value, like, you know, looking at it from an objective standpoint, like, yeah, this is a more entertaining series in that we're able to see the vision that the author behind Monster had play out in these. Whereas in the first series, like you said, it looked like something new and exciting, but its gas got sniped every game.
Yeah.
And then in the second series, we saw it work a little bit more, or it might not have been every game because I think there was a destination game in each series. But and then in the second series, we saw I don't think we saw the gas get sniped in any game, but we just did, because of the bug, we didn't get to see the true vision that the author had here. Whereas now we are, as observers, getting to see that. And again, that's not a slight on Monster or the author of Monster, but just speaking from a purely a watcher's perspective of the games.
Yes, and I do want to point out again, I mentioned it really early on in this broadcast, is that given some of the developments since this tournament, Monster would be playing against Stardust completely differently now. And what the author of, well, I want to cut that short real quick because it looks like Stardust is going to bust down this base this time. It did successfully bring in Observer this time. The Sunkens were again not pushed towards that ramp, even though there was ample time to do so. And I think this base is going to go down. Monster thought about leaving and trying to defend it, but it did not manifest that way. It has some more Overlords with Zerglings and Lurkers here, though. They're trying to stay away from these Dragoons. They got split up a little bit. They're scared. They're not going to be able to outrun these Dragoons, but Dragoons are more intent on killing the drones, it seems. And it looks like maybe he's going to try to retake that same base again as soon as Stardust leaves. Look, or maybe it's going to go all the way. Nope, it's taking the bottom right where the Dragoons are actually already there.
Yeah, I think what was happening there is it wanted the path along the edge, but because the army was already actively at that top right, it kind of threw the Overlords into like, I don't know what to do. Now, this is really interesting here because we have the the army of Monster getting caught in the middle, not able to get to the main, and not wanting to engage.
Yeah, and doesn't want to engage for sure because there is quite a number of Protoss here. The high ground would be the place to do it, but it just it's sheepish in its approach. It is running away. I feel like you could take some of the engagement up on the high ground, see if maybe Stardust overcommits. But actually, if this army goes all the way to the bottom right main base and helps secure that could be a play. That could be a determining factor for being able to hold that base. As we see drones now being transferred there. There is even more drones transferring because Monster is running out of minerals in its main base, and it did manage to get that hatchery up.
Yeah, but now that army in the middle is down to just 3 Hydralisks, so I don't know how this is going to play out for them.
It looks like Stardust is trying to go to the middle of the map, like generic middle of map. Something like on Fighting Spirit you would be able to do so, but not capable of doing so here because of the terrain features. Now navigating more closely to the main base, but I'm not sure if it's aware of that bottom right, or at least it took down the hatchery that was there, right? And so I think
it sees it now.
Yeah, but now with the observers spotting those lurkers should give it an indication that there might still be something there.
Yeah, so the observer came down, and I think it got the extractor just in vision, and then when it saw that's when it beelined back to the army.
I see. And the observer is actually following a path where it might be able to see the Overlords that are flying there as well. There's 2 Lurkers, 1 drone, and 3 Zerglings on the way there. Army production has resumed for Monster. It should be able to hold this meat grinder going for quite some time. There's still Zerglings burrowed along the map, and it should be noted that Stardust is only on 3 bases. It hasn't been able to really get that full map control that it normally that we've seen it happen before on Talcross, for example.
Yeah, now some Mutalisks are out on the field now, so it is starting to transition into that Mutalisk play that it tries to kind of grab that win with.
Yeah, but it only has 5 right now that I see on the map, and that has to come back to the fact that second base was denied. Now there's a probe that showed up there trying to find trying to find a new base for itself, but instead it finds that Monster has rebuilt that hatchery. The Lurkers are, interestingly enough, they're kind of off center here for that ramp. Generally you would see the Lurkers closer to the ramp, and ZVT, I mean, sorry. You generally don't see lurkers on ramps for ZVP at all, but or at least not this like solo standing there with no sunken spore support. But in this case, looks like Stardust, it just doesn't seem that all that interested in denying these bases for quite some time. It's more intent on keeping the Zerg penned into its main base.
Yeah, and something that I've noticed too through these games is that once the Mutalisks are out on the map, and like even if they're not actively harassing a base, the cohesion of Stardust's army seems to kind of break apart.
Yes.
Like it gets more spread out. It has trouble deciding, or not necessarily deciding, but being concise with where it wants to place its army, or decisive. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yes. I also want to add the fact that the way that the mutas move makes it especially frustrating. I saw this one mutalisk fly around that was one shot away from death for the past like 1 minute, and Dragoons kept trying to chase it, then they're like no, and then the muta would come back and gain their attention again, then fly away right before they could shoot at it. So I can definitely see how that could be a problem. I mean, if you look at the minimap, look how many individual random teal spots there are moving around the map, and Stardust is trying to chase them all down, but not fast enough to keep up with the air movement of mutalisks.
Yeah, and we are seeing the 4th base for Stardust being denied right now by a Burrowed Zerg, so eventually that is going to try and build a probe, and we're going to probably see a similar thing happen again there over time. But Monster is on its 3 bases, and it's got its Mutalisks out. This is the type of play that it's trying to go for. Now, we do have another attempt at the main, but it's going to fail. They're going to fall back.
There's quite a number of army in terms of Hydralisks there already. There's 2 Lurkers there as well. There's some Mutalisks there. On top of that, potentially posing more of a distraction for Stardust. And the probe count, as we've seen in the past, it's down below 30 now for Stardust, while Monster's continuing to climb towards that 60-65 range, and it's looking to take more bases. It's taking that 12 o'clock now. It looks like it was thinking about taking the natural for the new main base that it made at the top right, and it's looking like it might actually turn out to be a 5-4 despite a really shaky start for Monster.
Yeah, and something that I'm noticing that's happening too is occasionally it's flying a Mutalisk to this spot where Stardust is trying to take its 4th and clearing out that probe.
Oh
and
my god, that's so annoying.
And I think that is happening before the probe decides to place a pylon. And so then it sends a new one, and it essentially is starting like a new timer for how long it needs to fail before it places a pylon. And so I think that's just causing that denial of that base even longer.
Yeah, absolutely. And on top of that, Stardust economy is quite low too. I mean, it's on 1 base. It's not adding any probes now because it feels like it's kind of relegated itself. It's like, okay, I guess I'm a 1 base Protoss now. That's basically what it's saying. It's only rebuilding the probes that it needs for full saturation on 1 base until it makes that nexus. And as a result, it's never really gaining all that money back because it's losing those probes, remaking those probes. And we saw this before in Monster Series against, I believe it was Banana Brain, where Banana Brain was kept trying to get it back up to 75 workers off of like 2 mineral lines or something. And as a result, it spent all the money that it needed in order to actually claim those extra bases.
Yeah, and that's, I wonder sometimes, so like obviously you're going to oversaturate a base when you're planning to expand because then you have units to transfer quickly to get that base established faster. But I wonder if part of that is also too because as a human player in the middle of the game, you don't know the exact number of workers that you have. So you can't just go, okay, I have the exact amount I need to saturate this base, so I'm going to stop worker production. An AI knows exactly how many workers it has because it can just count how many workers are on the field that it has access to.
Yes.
So I wonder if part of that is, just the AI being able to do that, so it does that, or...
Humans do have a trick for that. What you do is you go to a mineral line, you select one half of it, and you count how many probes are there, then you select the other half. And generally that, if you selected more than 24 probes while doing so, that means that you oversaturated and you sent some over to a different base. So there are workarounds, but yeah, there is absolutely a kind of, you have to hone kind of an instinct about how many workers you have. I've had games where I accidentally ended up with 100 probes and I have to like send 20 of them to die. So it's definitely something that AI should be more precise about than a human being would be for sure.
Right, and I wonder if that sort of plays into why, so when Stardust only had the 1 mining base, which is now slowly falling to the Zerg, there are no more, actually, it's out of probes, or it's down to 3 probes, and it only has 38 minerals.
Yes.
And those 3 probes are in the main mining. I think the depleted guys are, yep, that is a depleted assimilator there. So I wonder if it, like you said, it's okay, well, this is the only mining base, so I have it saturated. I don't need more probes. Or it was slowly losing probes though to the Mutalisks.
Yeah.
But
And yeah,
I know there
sorry,
has. I was just gonna say. I know there has been debate too in the AI scene. You know, is it actually worth it to transfer? Do you actually gain by oversaturating your main and then moving things over? Because AI is able to do things like mineral lock to sort of get a little extra boost out of its mining that humans can't quite do.
yes. And yeah, I mean, Monster, it lost the series 5-3, but if we play out all 9 games, it's 5-4. And now it makes me think, you know, if we went to 15 games or, you know, 29 games or something, if we would, you know, it depends on where we make the cut, right? So if it was a best of 7, I believe Stardust went up 4-1 or 4-2 against Monster, so that would be the 4-7. I'm sorry, the 4-2 in a best of 7, but in a best of 9, we're now seeing 5-4, and it just goes to show how close these top 2 AI are actually to each other, especially with these interesting builds that they've chosen for their AIs.
Yeah, and I think it's kudos too to Monster's author, you know, for trying something new, seeing something in an opponent that they expected to face against in the elimination phase, and you know, just coming up with this off-the-wall build, you could say, because that's certainly not standard, and making it work well enough that, well, like you said, yes, in this best of 9, it, you know, did not produce a win for it, but, you know, if you extrapolated it across every single possible map, which I'm not sure exactly how many there are. Obviously, there's a 10th map, Andromeda, where they were timing out on. There's also the optional map that SSCAIT does not have in its regular rotation. It's the one with the second entrance that's blocked by the buildings. I can't.
I can actually tell you exactly what maps there are because I did download them at some point. If you give me 1 second, but you can tell me what you were thinking about given that map.
Well, I was just thinking, like, if you played it out against every single, like, so best of how many ever maps there are, where 1 game per map, you know, you could extrapolate it out at least that far. You know, I wonder how this could turn up, because essentially, to me, this makes it seem like this matchup is a coin flip in a way. It's heavily dependent on the maps that get chosen, and potentially dependent on how many rounds there are.
Yeah. So do you mean the electric circuit by any chance?
Yeah, that was the one I was thinking of.
Yeah, I was hoping to play a game on that map, but as Purple Wave told us, I believe that electric circuit's not really used. It's something that they expect authors to be ready for, but that would be an interesting map too. And I think actually lurker play on that map is quite interesting as well, because you can use lurkers to kill those neutral buildings, run things up. So I do think that I'm excited to see more Monster in the future on different maps, utilizing lurkers in different ways, even if right now it has that crackling build in its pocket.
Yeah, and I feel like this build too, while we only saw it used against Stardust, could be effective against other Protosses as well. Obviously, there are some holes in the build, like we've discussed through this series. But if the author wanted to continue this build and try it more, and, you know, implements improvements on it, even if not the things that we talked about, but other things that the author sees, it would be really exciting to see this a little bit more.
Yeah, and I just want to give one last closing thought about this build itself, is the fact that oftentimes you would expect, at least as a human player who you know, jumped into this scene a couple of years ago, I would expect AI to try to emulate human play, you know, because humans, you know, there's been millions of man hours invested into this game, paid teams, professional players, finding all the cute little optimizations that can happen to a build. That's why you go for 10 gateway, 11 gas, 13 cybernetics, for example, if you're Protoss. But this build is something that I've just simply never seen, or if it was a build, it was probably like popular in like 2001 or 2000 or something. It's something that you just can't see as a human in human tournaments. So that's what I really love about these AI tournaments, is you see things that you just don't see anywhere else in Brood War. And the fact that these AI play like superhuman, you know, insane speeds, they make the impossible possible. And while this build is maybe not as mechanically demanding as some of the other ones, at least until it gets to those multiple flocks of Mutalisks running around, it's still something that it should be exciting to any viewer of Brood War, just to see things that are possible in the game, how they can win games, without relying on the meta knowledge that has been established by the pro scene.
Yeah, I think one of the drawbacks to this particular build is it seems like it's designed to sort of exploit a flaw in Stardust with taking its expansion. So something that you can see, I mean, and even if you play like the stock AI that comes with StarCraft, for example, you start to learn, oh, if I do X, it does not respond well. It responds with Y, which is not very effective, or things like that. And so, sort of like, and you see the same things with these custom AIs for anybody that plays on Snail. You sort of start to learn things about if you play it enough where you go, okay, well, I can sort of exploit this AI if I do this. And sometimes you can win by finding that type of hole in it. And that feels sort of like what this build is meant to do. It's meant to throw a wrench into the way that Stardust is coded to expand. And if it can do that long enough to get a big enough Mutalist cloud to then exploit the fact that Stardust is not as decisive with its army placement when it's dealing with a really spread out opponent. That may not work so well against, say, Purple Wave or, say, Banana Brain, because it seems sort of custom tailored to Stardust. But I do wonder how it would perform against those other opponents.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we could maybe, if the bot authors in the chat or when they see the video, if they could comment or discuss it in the Discord with us, that would be something interesting to hear about. What Purple Wave said in the Snail Discord recently is that Brood War ultimately comes down to who has the bigger club in a lot of ways, right? And in this case, Stardust has a huge club in their 4-gate Dragoon, Micro, and Control, right? But Monster took what is considered to be, I would say, like a slightly more human approach, where it's trying to do this finesse balancing act where it has just enough money and gas to make an expansion with some lurkers and some drop tech. It's the opposite approach of the who has a bigger club build, and that's what made it really exciting for me to see this build and how it's actually quite competitive against the big club of Stardust here, as we saw in this 5-4 series.
Yeah, and it's funny, I feel like, when I first saw this build, I was like, what is Monster doing? Despite the problem with the building placement, because I'm like, it's getting one base, lurker, burrow, drop, like, what is going on with this build? And now I'm like, this build is exciting. I want to see it against everybody. Like, Monster has really, like, turned me almost into a fanboy here with the way that this executes, because when you stop and look at it long enough, and and all of the discussing that you and I have done about it, like, it's really exciting to watch the vision that the author had just come to fruit here. And even if it wasn't successful in taking the best of 9, it was very successful just overall, in my opinion.
Yep, I absolutely agree, and I think we've praised these AI long enough now. I think the viewers are maybe close to as hard as we are now after broadcasting these 9 games back to back. There's been a lot of things that we've seen, a lot of things that we've talked about, and definitely a lot of things to think about before our next episode, which will be coming next week. We'll be returning to our more standard form of broadcast, where we'll be going through the recommended games in the SSCAIT Discord. If you're interested in joining us and seeing those replays firsthand and maybe suggesting some of your own, we'll put the Discord link in the description below. And this has been Chobo Swaggins, aka Jealous from Team Liquid. It's been a pleasure broadcasting these games and the SSCAIT tournament for you guys. I hope to see you guys next week, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.
We'll see you then. Take care, everybody.